Bag them out.
Oh,
I've seen you somewhere.
Hey, that's trying.
Gilbert.
Had a knee surgery.
Bob, yes.
Knee replacement.
Yes, please.
8 days in hospital.
The speaker.
Are you?
Used to call it with
You just did
SOB.
one.
Senator or bishop.
It's, no, it's not very fun. You're doing.
Sounds like a train park.
Get a guy. Laying out a shell of it, but it's just so amazing how the robot does it all. I mean, it's.
So it sounds like Bigfoot guys, that'd be trying, the guys got something to work with. You know, you still working with them? I mean, I don't think.
But you're here that crazy. Give you one of those iPhone machines.
Yes.
And you go.
So that changes what's there. I understand what I understand. She's getting understood.
Oh, yeah.
No, he's getting there. So,
So,
you know, what you have strong.
Well, we'll see.
every time they get the stored water.
Another.
outside of that.
Yeah, we turn on something, because I mean, you know, we actually lined it up for them this year, because we knew.
So.
Okay, this is kind of a soft gavel. Okay, it is the appointed hour. We'd like to call to order Water Board meeting number 12-24, the work session of the meeting. Are we okay to go, Jennifer? Okay, this meeting is being held at the Idaho Water Center, and it's being streamed online for those who wish to participate over the internet. The first item of business is roll call. Could we have a roll call, please, Jennifer?
Mr. Barker,
Here.
Ms. Cole-Hansen. Here. Mr. Gibbs,
Here.
Mr. McMahon,
Here.
Mr. Olmstead,
Here.
Mr. Stevenson,
Here.
Mr. Van Stone,
Here.
and Chairman Raybould.
Here. Okay, thank you, Jennifer. We need to amend the agenda. We need to accommodate scheduling conflict to allow for some public comment today. We could have a motion to amend the agenda to include public comment.
Mr. Chair, I move that we amend the agenda to include public comment for our one guest who cannot be here tomorrow.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, we will now move to public comment. It's my understanding that Mr. Doug Jones has requested public comment this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Board. Doug Jones, Idaho Water Engineering. As you all well know, Lost Valley is one of our major projects. I just want to give you a very brief update on where we are. I can't be here tomorrow. I have a conflict. So where we are, status of the project. We did a lot of the environmental impact statement work our firm did over the summer. The squirrel piece is done. We haven't gotten the final report yet, but it is all done and written. We got a summary of it by email last night. The wetlands piece is also finished and the report is being written. The Forest Service, as we knew from the very beginning, is one of the slow pieces. Forest Service had a hard summer with fires, everything else. So they told us early in the summer that we're just going to put you guys off until fall. They have now come back to us. They have brought on some temporary staff, a retired staff person from that district who's familiar with the project. She will be reviewing what we have submitted so far this coming week with a holiday and everything in the week. She will then schedule a meeting with us before Christmas, early December. So that's an update on the Forest Service. At least the wheels are in motion again now that it's cooled off and rained, and hopefully the fire season is long gone until next year. So we think we're making really good progress. I think we're up to date with the billings and with submitting our invoices to staff to get reimbursed for your share of it. We just wanted to say thank you for what you have given us in terms of the grant. And I wanted to give you a little update informally, but I can't be here tomorrow. So happy to answer any questions. And other than that, I'll go sit back down.
Okay, board members, any questions for Mr. Jones? Brian?
Chairman, Mr. Jones, did it fill last year? Does it pretty much fill every year? Do you think the new 20,000 would fill most every year? Is that true?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Olmstead, the answer is yes. We've got automated stream flow records for now 7 or 8 years. So not every year, but most years. And particularly with the new capacity, if we have a little carryover in the bottom, because most years to this point, they've drained it dry. It's a mud flat by September. But if we have a little carryover, that improves the chances of filling it completely the following year. So not every year guaranteed. You guys all know the situation of water in Idaho, but most years, yes.
Okay, any further questions? Okay, thank you very much, Doug. Appreciate the update.
Thank you.
Okay, next item on the agenda, Mr. Patton, is Idaho Quagga Mussel update.
Yes, Nick Zerflu with the Idaho Department of Agriculture will give us an update. He's heading up the quagga mussel efforts for the state of Idaho.
Hey, welcome, Nick. Is that a special personalized plate for the director or what?
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, this for the office. Yeah, this is quagga mussels from Lake Mead. I don't know if you guys have seen this yet or not, or one like it, but I usually bring one around. You can pass it around, and they're semi-fragile. They've been lacquered on there, so they're.
We don't want to see the truck this was on.
Yeah.
That's right. Want to touch it?
Maybe contagious.
Yeah, good morning. Nick Zerflu, Bureau Chief, Idaho State Department of Agriculture. I help out with a few different programs at the department, one of which is the invasive species program, which we're mainly concerned about quagga and zebra mussels moving into the state, as well as a whole host of other invasive species that are on our list. And just before we start, can you guys hear me okay? Okay, perfect. I do have a slide deck. This is only the second time I've delivered this specific slide deck because we just came out of the project. So bear with me if it's a little clunky. We're kind of getting things smoothed out. But we did wrap up the 2024 treatment just a couple of weeks ago. We're for the copper, and we are gearing up to do a proposed potash treatment at some standing pools. So right now is actually a really good time between basically 2 treatments and the calm before the next storm, if you will. But and I'll go through some of the methodology behind that. But before we start out with the license plate, this is quagga mussels. A couple of slides on the impact. It is a bivalve, freshwater only. They reproduce very rapidly and they attach to substrate. And that's really what we're concerned about, is this attachment impeding water delivery, water infrastructure. They're also a filter feeder, so they'll open up. It's a bivalve, so one way in, one way out. And they're filtering plankton. And that's basically the base of the food chain or the food web, if you will. And they're very efficient at it. And so they would outcompete other bivalves in the system and really would have a detrimental effect on other aquatic species that rely on that same plankton source or up the food chain. The potential impacts, again, is that due to that colonization, it's just a clogging effect and impeding water delivery, something that this board knows very well. So give you a little background on my story. I come from an ag community in Eastern Oregon. This is why I take this issue so personally, as our family relies heavily on surface irrigation from a reservoir, goes through a main line and goes into our into our entire operation. So that's why when I caught wind of quagga mussels years ago, I went, this is an issue I can get behind. And so that's why no problem with the long hours and from the team is because there's a lot of us that are very passionate about ag in the state and keeping water going down the pipe. That work on quagga mussels in particular. One thing of note is just the detrimental effect the Columbia River Basin in its entirety. So water flows downhill, and of course, as quagga mussels spawn, that veliger is drifting downstream. And so if we have them in the mid-snake, and we don't get a handle on them, that veliger is going to float downstream, and we're going to start seeing quagga mussels and CJ Strike and Hell's Canyon, the lower Snake River dams, and eventually the Columbia River. And so there's a much larger impact the further you go downstream.
So, Mr. Chairman, there's no quaggas in the Columbia.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, great question. So there's multiple states that are monitoring the Columbia Basin and the Snake River. No detections downstream of this treatment area, including the Columbia River. Yeah, there's a huge effort going into sampling that area. Great question. Again, just some pictures showcasing the impact of water delivery and facilities, clogging pipes, clogging head gates and racks and things like that, pump systems, municipal, anything fresh water. So municipal, hydro, irrigation, kind of the list goes on and on. So 2023 treatment, just as a recap, the first detection ever in the Columbia River Basin was last year. This detection came on September 18th. We initiated a multi-agency coordinated response and had a quarantine, shut down the river, had a containment system, had a full delimit, did notifications and communications to the users, the stakeholders, the public, local, regional, and we did a treatment last year. It was October 3rd to the 13th. We utilized chelated copper, and it was really the first treatment of this scale ever attempted in North America. So between the water volume and the complexity, this is the first time it's ever been tried. Fast forward into the work that we did between 2023 and 2024. We worked with the legislature on an appropriation enhancement, $6.5 million to the program, expanded program across the board, whether that's sampling, monitoring stations, either running longer duration, longer hours, increased our outreach to the general public, specifically the boating public and those who would be affected by quagga mussels. One of the campaigns really pulled at, I guess the heartstrings of Idahoans, really talking about the impacts and why it's important. And then we did a lot of campaign messaging through various partners around the state. And that was really in effect why there was the ask there for the enhancement to the appropriation. Double monitoring statewide. Historically, we've sampled about 700 sites throughout the state. That increased, of course, a few years ago to 1,500. And again, this year we doubled monitoring around the state to now 3,000. And I'll have a map showing where we're sampling around the state. The detection this year was September 24th. Included the Shoshone Falls Pool, Pillar Falls, and Twin Falls. And I'll have a map showing that in the treatment area. One thing to note with the monitoring this year is the 2023 treatment did have a rather profound impact on the aquatic community in the mid-snake, including the quagga mussels. And so as we're going through 2024 monitoring, we saw very much a decrease in the amount of veligers that we're finding. So that's really good news, showing that the work last year was being affected. One thing this year is we did expand our delimit sampling to include 152 sample points along the mid-snake. This is in addition to the monitoring, the annual monitoring that we're already doing. And then we're also incorporating a new tool utilizing environmental DNA. Here's a map of our 2024 sampling locations. You can see that we're sampling all the major watersheds around the state, every reservoir and lake and large river impoundment river system. A lot of emphasis on the Snake River, the upper Snake, the mid Snake, and the lower Snake, and all of her impoundments. A lot of emphasis on the salmon, the Clearwater, the Coeur d'Alene, the Pend Oreille, of course, both the river and the lake. And then as you're working up to the far north, some emphasis on the Kootenai system. We do have an interactive web map. And so as you're going back home to your respective areas, feel free to go to our website and play around on that interactive map just to make sure that we're covering where you feel we should be sampling, because we don't know where all of our sampling sites should be. So one thing to note with quagga mussels is when you're announcing a detection is there needs to be a thorough verification process, meaning when you ring the bell and say, I've got quagga mussels in the mid-snake, you better know it's quagga mussels before you ring that bell. And so there's a series of steps that are outlined in the rapid response plan that we have to go through. One of which is multiple sampling events. So we're not just going out there once, we're going out there multiple times. We prefer different dates, different crews, different personnel, different nets, different watercraft. This is really in a way to kind of tease out any in-field cross-contamination or in the lab cross-contamination issues. We also like to have multiple specimens per container, meaning we don't want to just look at one veliger in a sample container. We want to look at 2 or 3 and potentially even up to 10 or 12. And then really we can look under a microscope using a cross-polarized light lens that'll show a distinct X pattern in the shell. And then once we pull that lens off, then we can look at shell morphology and get a good idea taxonomically what species that is. But the nail in the coffin is really the qPCR, that genetic verification. That's through another lab. So we'll send the specimen and the goop coming out of that sample container, because you can imagine taking a coffee filter through the Snake River in August and September and October, there's going to be a lot of stuff in that sample. But we're going to send a subsample of that to a genetics lab, and then they're going to run a qPCR for whether quagga or zebra mussel, and that's really the final say. So one thing we did learn in 2023 is the need to increase tools and lab capacity. So we need more experts looking at this specifically, dealing with the verification. So cross-polarized light microscopy, looking under a microscope. We historically had Aquaticus there in Florida. We added on a second microscopy lab, eco-analysts there out of Moscow. We also have several leading experts in North America that we can send specimens or photographs of specimens within a moment's notice. So that's just sent via email. We've got 5 or 6 folks identified around the nation that are able to look at specimens. And then for my molecular confirmation, we're utilizing Pisces Molecular out of Colorado. And for environmental DNA, we're utilizing both Pisces and University of Idaho Aquatic Research Lab out of Hagerman. So that was really one thing that we learned last year, is just expanding lab capacity. That way, when we go to do our delimit, we have 150 samples and we replicate that multiple times, that we're not bogging down our lab and having to wait for samples to come back or analysis to come back. To give an idea of the timeline of this year's response, again, the detection occurred this year on September 24th. We did delimit sampling from September 24th up until about October 6th. The treatment began October 8th. The treatment concluded on October 19th. That's 200 hours after we felt confident that the 1 part per million targeted rate was being held. So it was actually longer than 200 hours for the entire treatment. We're just focusing on that when we were comfortable with that rate. And then today we're essentially preparing for the next phase of the treatment. That proposed treatment is to utilize potash or muriate of potash, calcium chloride or potassium chloride in the standing pools around Twin Falls, Shoshone Falls, and Centennial, and Pillar Falls. So a little bit on conducting delimit surveys
Well, Mr. Chairman, Nick, could you just go back one slide there?
Yeah.
So that picture in the bottom, is that the river above Twin Falls, where the real small channel is?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, Brian, exactly right.
You
Yeah,
treated, that was the top point of your treatment. Probably.
correct. Yep, and I'll have a map showing the top end. Yep.
And about 200 CFS or 300 there. Or?
That was one of the keys this year, is working with Idaho Department of Water Resources and their hydrologists to identify the CFS flow going through that Sageview area, because that was an unknown. We weren't working with a hydroelectric facility, but I think we identified 374 CFS going through that bottleneck right there. Sorry if I'm running out of time. I'm known to talk long. So.
Yeah, go ahead. This is interesting. We need to know this, so please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The initial plankton tow samples were detected in Centennial and Shoshone Falls, but the delimit sampling strategy was to start upstream with brand new clean plankton nets, working methodically, traveling downstream across the river current. And that way you get upstream, you're going to get 0 detections, and at some point you're going to start to encounter veligers, or preferably a plume of veligers, which would indicate an adult colony down below, and then they'll start to stagger and go down in frequency as you're going downstream. We went all the way up to Milner, working downstream. One of the main areas that we focused on this year, because we had a detection upstream of Twin Falls Reservoir, was really that Milner to Hansen Bridge section. And for those that are familiar with that, that's a pretty rugged, remote section of the Snake River within that area, just how deep in the canyon it is. Once you get down there, you're very much committed. But we gridded out that whole entire river section between Milner all the way down through Cauldron Lynn, down to Hansen Bridge and to the top end of the Twin Falls Reservoir. Fortunately, we haven't had any detections upstream of Hansen Bridge, or really that Sageview area, where now it's making a lot more sense. It's not very many veligers, but right in the top end of that Twin Falls Reservoir, there's a nice big area where watercraft turn around. Mainly larger watercraft like wakeboarding boats, ski boats, larger fishing boats. Because they're not going to go upstream of that point. The channel just gets too small and too rocky. But right in that deep hole is right where we found those first few veligers in that area. But we did extend the delimit upstream to American Falls, and we did extend the delimit downstream past CJ Strike, just to get a better idea of what's going on upstream and both downstream. Here's to show a picture of those delimit sampling points. These are not detections. These are just the sample locations. Starting downstream towards Auger Falls, working upstream above Hansen Bridge, all the way up to the base of Milner.
Yes.
Can you point out where the Hansen Bridge is on this map?
Absolutely, it is. Right around this 145, no, 124. It's right in here. So the main area that we were looking at for delimit upstream was this 152, which is at the base of Milner, down through Cauldron Lynn. That's right around 144, 145. We launched there and took pack rafts down this section. We actually got stuck down there and had to spend the night. And then we came out at Hansen Bridge.
Dean.
Mr. Chairman, so maybe you're gonna answer this question later, but I'll ask it now. Where do you think it started? Did it start in that upper pool at Twin Falls?
Yeah, I think that theory is making a lot more sense now, that we were finding veligers last year below Shoshone Falls and above Shoshone Falls. But getting watercraft in and out of those areas it didn't make a whole lot of sense, especially below Shoshone Falls. But now, and we sampled the Twin Falls Reservoir last year multiple times. I want to say 5 or 6 times throughout that entire delimit. Repeat. No veligers found, which was always just a head scratcher for all of us. But now that we're finding veligers up there, albeit very small, one sample had 2 veligers, the other sample had 1. So we're not dealing with very many specimens, but knowing that there's something going on upstream of Twin Falls, it's making a lot more sense where potentially a boat came in, some type of watercraft came in, launched at Twin Falls and went upstream to where that turnaround is. That makes sense to me.
Do you have an idea when this initial transmission of the villagers, probably like middle of summer, 4th of July type deal? Is that, or what do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mr. Chairman. And the adult quagga mussel we found last year was a 2-year-old mussel. So it would have been 3 years old this year if we wouldn't have killed it last year. We had high mortality in that mussel last year. But this year, those individuals would have been potentially 3 years old.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, Nick, the one you found this year, you think that's a new introduction of the villagers or the carryover from last year?
Mr. Chairman, Dale, good to see you. Good morning. It is most likely something that was there last year, but just the amount of villagers being produced last year, even with the amount of sampling that we were doing, we did not pick up any villagers upstream of Twin Falls last year. So I highly doubt it was a new inoculation from this year.
It's just a carryover from last year?
Correct.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we're good.
Yep. So going into the detections this year, again, highlighting the above Twin Falls, around the Shoshone Falls and Pillar Falls sections. Again, talking about that extended delimit and how we're still only finding villagers right in this immediate treatment area. That is great news. Not finding anything down below Auger Falls and Bell Rapids and CJ Shrike. There's still very much an opportunity to control it here if we can contain it here. You know, we all know as you're moving downstream, especially closer to Thousand Springs area, the water dynamics and the volume and the species of concerns really changes our options for treatment. So this goes right into our proposed treatment plan and our treatment map. You can see this year we're including that additional treatment area upstream of Twin Falls Power Electric facility, all the way up to what we're calling Sageview. And why we're calling it that is there's a subdivision up on the rim that the road is called Sageview right there. That's where that name came from. And this was that area at the top end of the treatment where we really needed the help identifying what that CFS is at. Because again, Milner at that time of year is reading 0. And we know it's somewhere between 0 and 410 as we get to the Twin Falls Dam. And so getting the watercraft, the flow meter watercraft from Department of Water Resources out there and their staff to be able to identify that with really narrow margin for error, that was crucial to this treatment because that 374 CFS, that sets the pace for the entire treatment. The majority of the chelated copper was dripped in at Sageview. And then as you're moving downstream and you're increasing CFS, simply we're just doing a differential. So if we add in 100 CFS, we'll add in 100 CFS differential worth of copper. But the majority of the treatment is occurring at Sageview. So again, for 2024 extended treatment area, Twin Falls Reservoir, 8.6 river miles this year. Last year, it was around 6 river miles. For this, additional tools and partners were needed, like for identifying the deep holes and the CFS. We did select chelated copper. It's labeled for this rate, 1 part per million, 200-hour treatment. This is significantly different from last year. Last year was 2 96-hour treatment blocks. This year was 1 continuous treatment, no break in the middle at 200 hours. And that 200 hours did not start until we were confident we had met and maintained that target 1 part per million rate. So we actually didn't start the treatment, the 200-hour time clock, until about 3 days into the treatment itself. We had some challenges that I'll go through that we're working with some deep holes within that complex, that we were having a hard time getting product to go down into these deep areas and maintain rate throughout that entire 100-foot water column. And so that was really the significant challenge that delayed our 200-hour time clock. It is labeled for this use site. It's labeled for flowing water. It's registered in the state of Idaho, and we're able to work with the manufacturer to get product on site in order to perform the treatment. Here's a basic breakdown of the treatment. We're going to identify the section of river, basically the treatment polygons. We're going to place totes, ag totes, 275-gallon totes at the top end of the treatment and throughout the treatment area with a hose and a meter box. And we're going to identify ounces per minute, ounces per second that are needed to maintain 1 part per million for the duration of the treatment. Again, we did another double check with EPA, Fish and Wildlife Service on the label and the application. It started on October 8th. It ran until October 19th. Just under 64,000 gallons of product was applied. That's a lot of totes. Copper was actively monitored pre-treatment, during the treatment, and post-treatment. And we were back down to baseline copper levels right around November 8th. So all that copper has moved through the treatment and dissipation area, and now it's back down to baseline. Some treatment challenges this year. It's a complex river system. We all know the Snake River, especially in that area. There's a lot of water delivery and exchange, and really assessing those deep holes, the springs, the waterfalls. And this is really when we called in the cavalry. At some point, we had DEQ, water resources, ITD with an underwater drone. We had a lot of folks out there trying to help us understand just those deep areas within the river and the complexity and how we were going to prescribe a treatment plan to address that, which basically included utilizing a treatment boat with different length of hose and different nozzles. We mixed product at different rates, and we went around those deep holes. But it really took identifying the holes first before we could get to that point. We also had to work through several isolated ponds. We worked through the Idaho Power hydroelectric facilities. And at the same time, when we're injecting copper into the system, we needed to work with Fish and Wildlife Service and Office of Species Conservation on sensitive species downstream and making sure we're not elevating copper levels too far downstream near Banbury, where we would start seeing mortality of ESA species downstream. Give you an idea of what this looks like. We've got totes on trucks and boats and on helicopters. Again, this year we needed a helicopter in 2 of our survey boats to retrofit into treatment boats. This is basically needed because you can't launch a boat between Pillar Falls and the base of Shoshone Falls. There's no access there. Non-motorized access, you can portage Pillar Falls and get small John boats or kayaks up there. But as far as treatment boats, the only option that we could see is to helicopter them in. Here's a map showing the isolated ponds. Again, just really what we need here is acre feet of water column, and then we can prescribe a treatment specific to each one of those standing pools. The treatment monitoring side, target concentration again is 1 part per million. We had 70 active monitoring sites throughout this treatment area for copper specifically. A lot of these were in the field copper calorimeter tests using a copper reagent. And then we did the quagga mussel sampling with the plankton toe samples, and then as well as the dissipation area downstream, making sure that we're not elevating copper levels too high. This is a map showing that dissipation area. It's 16 miles from Centennial Park downstream to Kanaka Rapids. And we actually went a little bit further downstream to that, going down to Banbury. Just kind of wrapping up here, the treatment impact overall. So we did see from the treatment last year, we did have an impact on the adult quagga mussels, the sentinel sites, and the adult colony because we were finding less veligers this year. Similar response for the 2024 treatment. Sample results from this year post-treatment show that we had, again, a profound impact on the aquatic community, including the quagga mussels. So you can see on the bottom right of your screen there, that is an empty veliger. So we had picked that up post-treatment. in our sampling this fall, following the treatment. And that's a hollow shell. That's exactly what we want to see. The picture above is showing Asian clam or Curbicula clam. Basically, these clams have evacuated their shell and are now floating and caught up in a back eddy. And this is exactly what we want to see, because an Asian clam is a great sentinel, comparable species to the quagga mussel. And so seeing these dead clams post-treatment is a good sign. We did continue sampling for veligers until the water temperature fell below 10 Celsius. That's kind of that's our trigger point. So now we're signed up once again for a long, cold winter, waiting until spring when those water temperatures come back up into the range and we can start sampling again. One thing that we saw this year was quite a bit lower fish mortality, but we did see a significant change in both the water color and the clarity when we performed our treatment, mainly because the product itself is blue and it's mainly used as an algicide. So a lot of that plankton life, the phytoplankton in particular and algae, totally dropped out of the system, increasing water clarity.
Joanne.
Nick, did you see limited fish mortality because of the treatment that occurred last year and pretty much wiped out the fish? Then
it's a great question, Mr. Chairman. And yes, so a lot of the treatment area last year saw significant fish mortality. Those fish community was not replenished, not restocked, because we were anticipating, or we were thinking we might need to do a second treatment potentially. That's the way invasive species worked. It's rarely a one and done. And so those treatment areas were not restocked. The treatment area, the new treatment area upstream of Twin Falls Reservoir, that fish community was not nearly as complex and significant as what was going on downstream. So no sturgeon, mainly just carp and large scale sucker.
Brian.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman. Last year there was, as I recall, the bass survived treatment pretty well. I mean, a lot of them did. Did you find that true again this year, that the bass seem to survive while suckers and stuff get killed?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, that remained true this year, is that smallmouth and largemouth bass both were not nearly as affected as some other fish species like carp and large scale sucker. We did see some fish mortality in largemouth and smallmouth bass, but not to the scale of those other species.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman,
Dale.
Nick, the village will go dormant when the water temperature gets to a certain temperature.
Great question, Mr. Chairman, and Dale, correct. So they don't necessarily go dormant. The adult quagga mussel they stop reproducing at that temperature range. So the availability of finding them in the water column goes way down. And the reason why we don't sample in the wintertime is we don't want to have a false sense of hope in a way that, we sampled all winter and we're not finding them. Well, they're not spawning. They're not spawning right now. So the quagga mussel adult goes dormant. The veliger itself, the larval form of the mussel, are just not being produced.
Thank you.
Chairman.
Al.
Two unrelated questions, if I may. One is, you mentioned sampling down to Badberry. Have you seen any impact on the Badberry snails or the listed species?
Great question, Mr. Chairman. That was one thing that we really worked closely with Office of Species Conservation, Fish and Wildlife Service, getting pre-treatment, during the treatment, very much post-treatment, copper monitoring. There was no measurable impact. Granted, we were very careful about going into that colony, because one would argue that you would cause more damage verifying the colony is safe by wading in there versus the copper. The way that spring works is when it meets into the Snake River, there's a significant amount of freshwater plume pushing product out. So there's an additional buffer before the colony even starts. So we really had to be careful just how we went into that colony, but no measurable impact.
And Chairman, second question, since this is such a potentially pervasive problem for the entire region, have we gotten any support from Reclamation, Corps of Engineers, the federal government at all on trying to combat these problems because their facilities are directly at risk.
Mr. Chairman, yes. Short answer is yes. Once we set out, this is a multi-agency coordination. It's led by the state and the state agencies, but there's a massive federal nexus involved, whether it's potential impact downstream to federal facilities, or funding sources or ESA. There's multiple federal nexuses. The main way we're seeking support is through a 50-50 cost share with the Corps of Engineers for supporting the treatment and the expense of the treatment.
Yes, thank you.
So future efforts moving forward, the program has very much shifted from a prevention state to now a prevention containment state, and that comes with a whole host of different flavors. There's mandatory inspection and decontamination for the Mid-Snake, including now Twin Falls Reservoir. We're working with Idaho Power on getting a plan in place to inspect and decontaminate all watercraft coming out of Twin Falls Reservoir. We had that set up all year at Centennial Park, working with the county. We've made significant improvements to that park, paving, facilities, water, to help facilitate large-scale watercraft inspection and decontamination happening there. Shoshone Falls, we're working with the city on that site as well, through an agreement. Again, focusing that 100% containment. Nobody's coming out of there without getting a decontamination. One thing to note is Shoshone Falls and Twin Falls are actually closed still, because they're working on those facilities. They're doing construction on the rock face going down into Shoshone Falls, and they're working on the site down at Twin Falls. So those local cooperators have those closed. Mandatory inspection for all out-of-state watercraft prior to launch. That was something new coming out of this year's legislative session, as well as a pull-the-plug law. This is something that other states have had. We identified it as a need, and we worked with the legislature on getting that in place in statute, where all watercraft need to have all types of plugs removed, whether that's bilge, live well, ballast tank, for any overland transport of that watercraft. Just give you an idea on the current closure, mandatory decontamination between Hansen Bridge down to Broken Bridge or Eaton's Grade. This includes Twin Falls, Shoshone, and Centennial Park. And just two more slides and we'll wrap this up. I get the privilege of telling the story, and we're going into the winter months where I'm going to be on the road telling the story quite a bit, but this is hardly my story to tell. I was on the Mid-Snake. I was definitely a part of it, but you can't get to this scale of treatment unless you can get everybody together. So multi-agency coordination, species conservation on ESA, fish and game on the fish mortality, DEQ doing all the in-water copper monitoring that's not associated with the treatment, that's more associated with water quality. So there's multiple eyes looking at that. Department of Water Resources, again, crucial to identifying the flow coming into Twin Falls that was essentially unknown. It was a wild guess, and you can't wild guess 1 part per million. Okay, you've got to be certain of that flow, and sure enough, their little watercraft nailed it. So Department of Lands for space and for having water aircraft available off of one of their fire contracts to airlift our boats in there. Parks and Recreation, huge sounding board for boaters in Idaho. So if we need to get a communication out to boaters, they have listservs, whether it's through the invasive species stickers or the registration, that they can get the word out really quick and easy. And then of course, ITD. So those are just the state partners. You can see working with Idaho Power, Simplot, Soil Builders, they were there helping provide the product and deliver it to us. So there was definitely a private nexus there. Federal agency we had talked about, contracted applicators, local leaders within the community, again, pulling from the city and the county, and then industry partners throughout the state, such as yourself. So again, I get the privilege of telling the story, but I was just there. So with that, I would close and just happy to answer any questions you might have on the treatment or the proposed treatment coming up.
Okay, Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nick, two questions, quickly. How long was the license plate in Lake Mead? I used to have a pipe on my desk back in my legislative days. I used to know the answer to the question, but I don't anymore. And then how much was spent on the treatment this year?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mark, good to see you. So the license plate was suspended below Lake Mead for just over a year.
Thank you.
And that's what you're looking at. As far as cost of the treatment, for the 2024 treatment, those costs are still falling into place. Of course, we still need to do the proposed potash treatment. That takes us Section 18. That's going to come with some cost. But just to give you a ballpark, we're probably right around $3.5 million at this point, which is more than last year because we expanded our treatment area and we expanded our treatment timing.
Okay. Dale.
Nick, overall, how many contaminated boats did you find this year coming into the state from all your stations?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and I can give you a breakdown for the far north too. I don't have that number with me, but I can pull that for you. But I think we're right around 19 or 20 mussel-fouled watercraft for this year.
Now, most of those mussels, are they dead on the boat?
Correct. All the ones that I remember from this year were non-viable. They were dead mussels. I don't remember any live viable mussels on boats this year.
They get in water, do they come back into life again?
No.
They're dead. They won't.
Fortunately, with the roadside watercraft inspection stations, the majority of the watercraft that we find that have mussels on them are carrying dead mussels. But occasionally we find a boat that has live, fresh mussels that has recently come out of a water body and that has not been decontaminated. Those ones scare me, and we have found those ones before. I don't remember one of those this year that I remember.
Well, I know you get them from the Great Lakes and Lake Mead, Lake Powell. Those are the main sources of these.
Yeah,
into the state.
exactly. Yeah, mussel-foul water bodies in the Great Lakes region, the Midwest. So even the Dakotas, Nebraska, and Oklahoma, all the way down into Texas. And then very much the lower Colorado from Lake Powell mainly to Mead, Havasu, Mojave, Pleasant, and all the way down through the aqueduct. Yeah.
Dean.
Mr. Chairman, so what about the potash treatment? What product are you using on that? And what's the parts per million going to be, or what?
Yeah.
About that.
Yeah, great question, Mr. Chairman. It's a proposed treatment at this point because we have to work through what they call a Section 18 because this is a fertilizer, muriate of potash, 0062 fine is what we're looking at. I think more common now as you see 0060, it's a very similar product, but it's potash, calcium, potassium chloride, KCl at 100 parts per million has been shown to be effective, causing mortality of quagga mussels. The reason why we have to go through a Section 18 consultation is it is not a registered pesticide in Idaho, or it's not even registered or recognized as a pesticide with the US EPA. 100 parts per million.
Okay, so any other questions? With regard to the potassium chloride treatment, what do you anticipate the timeline will be for that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mr. Chairman. Again, proposed, we've got a lot of hoops to jump through, and it's for the standing pools only. We're not treating the river. At least that's the intent right now. So it's just the standing pools. We're looking at the first week of December. If we can get everything in place, we've already got product headed this way, working on the labeling and get the packaging right. But looking at the first week of December, it'll be roughly a 14-day treatment window.
Okay, so those pools are adjacent to the river, but flow in the river would not compromise that treatment?
Correct. So during spring runoff, high flow events, those standing pools are submerged. There we go. Are totally submerged with water. At some point in the summertime, the water levels drop, and those are now standing pools adjacent to the river. But at one point, they very much had Snake River water in them. So the opportunity for quagga mussels to be in there is there. We did treat all these staining pools with chelated copper, but just for some extra assurance, we're proposing to treat them with potash.
Okay, thank you. Board members, any other questions? This has been very good, much appreciated. It's nice to be up to speed on what's going on and appreciate all the efforts of the Department of Ag to try and contain this problem and hopefully eventually eliminate it.
Yeah, that's our goal.
Mr. Chairman,
Mark,
I do have one real short question. Utah Sand Hollow, I believe it was, wasn't that considered contaminated once? And were they able to clean that reservoir up?
Sand Hollow, if I remember right, is a great example of verifying detection before announcing it. Because if I remember right, that was back in the BOR sampling days when there was potentially some cross-contamination issues in the lab, crews going to multiple water bodies. No adults, if I remember right, no adults were found. It's not on the infested list that I know of.
It was there for a short period of time, as I recall, then it didn't ever verify. Is that correct? Yeah, thank you.
That's why that verification step, and we do this with a whole host of other ag-related pests. You've got to get genetic verification, multiple samples, multiple eyes looking at it.
okay, all right, anything else? Okay, thank you, Nick, appreciate it.
Thank you. Let me know if you have any questions.
You'll be the first to know. Yeah. Okay, Brian, next up, Big Wood groundwater management area.
Yes.
I guess, are we up, board, we're okay to go for a while? Yeah, okay.
All right. Shelley Keaton with the department will give an update on the Big Wood groundwater management area and the negotiations leading to an extension of the agreement there.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Welcome, Shelley.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, and board members. I'm Shelley Keene with the Department of Water Resources, and I've been asked to report to you on the Big Wood River Groundwater Management Area Management Plan. You've heard reports on this topic in 2021, 2022, 2023, and already once this year. And it's time for another report because the 3-year management plan expires at the end of 2024. And the advisory committee has recommended, as Brian mentioned earlier, extending the existing current plan with a few revisions. And since you've already heard a lot about this topic, I won't spend much time on the background or context other than just to show this map on the screen while we're running through this topic. So as I mentioned, the 3-year management plan approved in 2022 expires December 31st, 2024. Earlier this year, Director Weaver asked the advisory committee to recommend a new longer-term management plan for 2025 and beyond. From February through October, the advisory committee met 11 times and explored a wide range of options for a new plan. And by the end of October, with the deadline looming and lots of questions remaining, the advisory committee chose to recommend extending the existing plan for an additional 3 years rather than recommending comprehensive changes intended for the long term. So the extension recommendation has 2 significant components. First, because the advisory committee still has a lot of technical questions, There is a list of actions to be accomplished during the 3-year extension. And these actions will develop the information needed for deliberating probably in 2027 on a new plan for 2028 and beyond. Second in the recommendations is a set of adjustments to the existing plan to reflect a few lessons learned during the 3 years of experience under the existing plan. So before I highlight a few of the recommended actions and adjustments, let's quickly recap the structure of the existing plan. The plan is intended to reduce the likelihood that senior surface water users in the lower Littlewood and Big Wood rivers will make delivery calls against junior hydraulically connected groundwater pumpers. And at the heart of the existing management plan are 5 main strategies. First is a commitment by groundwater users to maintain 32 CFS flowing in the Littlewood River at Station 10 near Richfield during the irrigation season. Second, groundwater users will acquire and deliver Snake River storage water via the Milner-Gooding Canal to Littlewood River water users below Station 54 and the lower Big Wood River water users. Third, groundwater users implement a set of baseline conservation measures like fallowing of irrigated land every year, with additional mitigation measures required in dry years. Fourth, groundwater users make financial contributions to the Conservation Infrastructure and Efficiency Fund, or CEF as we call it, for water projects. And fifth, groundwater users contribute funding for cloud seeding. So those are the 5 main strategies in the existing plan. The advisory committee's recommendation, which you have in your meeting materials, is in the form of a letter to Director Weaver. And it calls for the basic plan structure to remain the same for 3 more years. However, in response to the experience of the last 3 years, the advisory committee has recommended several adjustments, and they are on pages 2 through 5 of the advisory committee's letter in your materials. And I'll just go through a few of the key recommendations. So one is to define wet years with conditions like they had in the basin in 2023, and eliminate the need for groundwater users to fallow irrigated land in wet years. That we didn't anticipate with the initial plan wet years, and it had provisions in place for dry years. So we learned from that. Second, allow Galena Groundwater District to fallow irrigated land outside its district boundaries. Inside Galena, it's hard to find large tracts of irrigated land to fallow. The recommendation would allow Galena to pay others west of Highway 75 to fallow irrigated land. Another recommended adjustment based on experience is to add a few exceptions to the September 15th groundwater irrigation season of use shutoff. For example, irrigation can continue back past September 15th on common spaces used for community events and for sports teams still in season. And we had public comment asking for the advisory committee to consider that exception. And I'll just touch on some recommended increases in groundwater user contributions to the CEF. So under this proposal, the cities, Sun Valley Water and Sewer District, and the Sun Valley Company will increase their contributions from $10 per acre foot of annual non-irrigation use to $20 per acre foot. The city's Sun Valley Water and Sewer District and the Sun Valley Company will also increase their contributions for cloud seeding from $3.60 per acre foot to $5 per acre foot of use. And significantly, that will be split evenly between operations and new infrastructure proposals. Galena Groundwater District will contribute $25 per acre foot of its annual use to the SEEF for storage water acquisition. And the SEEF committee, rather than Galena Groundwater District, will accomplish all future Snake River storage water acquisition. So just recommending changing who's responsible for that effort. And then Groundwater District 37B, Groundwater Association, that's the Camas Prairie Irrigators. They'll increase their contributions to the SEEF from $10,000 annually to $20,000 annually, split evenly between infrastructure and efficiency measures and cloud seeding operations. So those are some of the recommended tweaks or adjustments to the existing plan that the advisory committee recommends extending. And now I'll touch on some of the action items the advisory committee is recommending. Here are some of the key ones. Develop and evaluate the April 1 allotment or A1A model for consumptive use estimates to determine if it can be the basis for a longer term management plan. And that's kind of a complicated concept. So I asked Mike McBay from the technical advisory committee to give me a definition. And here's what he sent me. The April 1 allotment model uses the April 1 surface water supply index to estimate the maximum upper basin groundwater consumptive use that can be diverted and or how much storage water should be purchased to satisfy senior surface water users in the lower basin. And to do this, the model leverages relationships between the Bigwood River at Haley flow, Silver Creek and Littlewood River flows, and Magic Reservoir return flows to predict August flows at the Littlewood River Station 54. So that's a complicated proposal, but it's something the advisory committee felt strongly should be referred to the technical group supporting them, and it's being reviewed. The advisory committee also recommended updating calibration of the Bigwood River groundwater model. That's been on the department's radar and it's scheduled to be completed in 2026. Support the Camas Prairie hydrologic project. That's the study to characterize the aquifer in the Camas Prairie. USGS has that scheduled to be completed in 2027. Complete at least a prototype of the Water District 37 accounting model, and IDWR has begun that project. And the advisory committee has also asked for some analyses. One is to prepare a report evaluating the 32 CFS 4-day moving average stream flow target at Station 10 and report on, the justification for the stream flow target and who's really benefiting from that. They've asked for a similar report to evaluate a possible total inflow target into Magic Reservoir, kind of balance the plan so that there's a provision on the Littlewood side and the Big Wood side. They've asked for a report on the effects of administering water rights consistent with the Bureau of Reclamation, AFRD2, and Big Wood Canal Company exchange conditions. And Water District 37 is learning how to administer water rights consistent with that provision, and we're expecting to develop some experience over the next couple of years. And another key request is to evaluate options for Water District 37 and 37B to report groundwater diversions during the irrigation season. And this may facilitate the use of individual user pumping reductions as a management tool. So what do the groundwater users participating in the management plan get for implementing their mitigation plan actions? They would get safe harbor from administration of their water rights on a time priority basis. And I do think it is worth noting, because there was a lot of discussion about this in the advisory committee meetings, that there is some angst, if you will, about whether the safe harbor provision in Idaho Code 42-233B, if tested in court, applies only to administration under 42-233B, or whether it also applies to delivery calls. So what lies ahead? Over the next month, IDWR is preparing an updated management plan document showing the changes recommended in the letter. And then before the end of this year, the director has said he will review the advisory committee's recommendations and probably issue an order extending the management plan. Then in February, the advisory committee will meet to review the annual reports required by the plan, get updates on the recommended actions, and consider some questions about SEEF operations. And I think IDWR, probably in conjunction with Water District 37, will evaluate some options for enforcing the management plan provisions in the future. So then looking further ahead, what might IDWR be hoping to see in a new plan 3 years from now? Some thoughts. One idea is a longer term management plan with less reliance on Snake River storage water. 2 would be, as we mentioned earlier, stream flow targets for the Big Wood River side of the basin to parallel the flow target for the Littlewood. Probably we'll be looking at groundwater conservation measures for the Camas Prairie Aquifer, consistent with the findings of the USGS study when it's finished. Probably more groundwater conservation measures overall to compensate for reduced reliance on Snake River storage water down the road, and maybe some specific enforcement provisions. And then immediately ahead, I think next on your agenda, you'll hear from Neely Miller a little bit more about the SEEF and its operations. And I'd just like to wrap up by acknowledging the hard work of the advisory committee. They met for long hours during busy times of the year to get to this point. And I just want to express my appreciation for their dedication to getting to this point. And that, Mr. Chairman, concludes my presentation. I'll stand for questions.
Okay, board members, any questions for Shelley? Pat?
First and foremost, Shelley, from somebody that was in the front row, thanks for all your efforts. And Sean Benson used to always put up a slide of herding cats, and I think that's pretty much what you were doing. But yeah, thank you for that. And so going forward, do you have a meeting schedule beyond February, or is that to be determined?
From my perspective, it's to be determined, but I think we would be open to suggestions and would like to hear, if the advisory committee has some thoughts on that meeting pace. That would be great to hear about that.
Hopefully I won't speak for them very much longer.
Good luck with that, Pat.
Be a lot of volunteers for that job.
Yeah, they're standing in line. No, thanks, Shelley. Appreciate it. You did a great job, and it was some blood, sweat, and tears put out there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Al,
So, Mr. Chair, Shelley, you said that the department's already created a prototype for the accounting program for the 37. Did you say that? Did I hear that right?
The department has begun working on a prototype. They're doing some work in Excel to try to code up the basic rules that would go into how the accounting model would work. And my understanding is that that effort has been focusing on the Littlewood, and they need to then look over on the Bigwood side and also look upstream of Magic and bring those areas into the modeling effort. So it's going to take some time, Mr. Barker.
Well, that's what I thought. I thought that they had completed it, and I thought I heard you say they had completed it. So I guess the point I want to make is that in 2021, the advisory committee asked the department to do this, and then it didn't happen over the next 3 years. So what's the schedule for carrying out a accounting program for Basin 37? Is there one that the department has?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Barker, the project is underway, and I think the department believes that it can get done by 2027 in time for deliberations for the next extension of the plan or a new plan. But I don't know that for sure. We have to look at, all the existing work that our technical folks have to do in a variety of basins on a variety of projects and fit that one in.
So is the schedule to have a prototype done in 3 years, or to actually have the accounting program done in 3 years?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Barker, not sure I can answer that question. I think,
because I'll just say, I think it's important for people in the basin to understand the impacts of all of these various things that are going on, if they know how water is actually being delivered in accordance with the prior appropriation doctrine. And that's why we have these accounting programs in all the other basins. And so that was a request that was made that's really integral to trying to get everybody on board that this system is working fairly in Basin 37. So just going to encourage the department to try to find time to get that done.
thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Barker.
Thank you, Mr. Key.
okay, further questions? Brian,
Real quick, Shelley, I don't think anybody would argue that, you're the world's foremost expert on the Bigwood area and this management plan now. So can you guarantee you won't retire in the next 3 years?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Olmstead, I don't know about me being the world's foremost expert. I have learned a lot, though, I will say, from this opportunity to be involved in this project. And as far as my longevity at the Department of Water Resources, I have no immediate plans.
Recording.
It's recorded.
Looks like you're good.
Look at that now.
Looks like you're gonna be here for a long time. Okay, any other questions for Shelley?
Mr. Chairman,
Joanne?
I think I want to acknowledge the fact that Mr. Luke appears to be in the audience. And he was also involved in the very beginning of this agreement. And I want to publicly thank both of you too, getting into this.
Okay, absolutely. And we had two board members, Mr. Olmstead and Mr. Stevenson, who I think have spent quite a bit of time up in the Wood River Valley, and I'd like to acknowledge and thank them for their time. Okay. Now Neely's gonna talk to us, or you?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Shelley. We do appreciate you and do plan on you being here for quite some time. Oh, Carl Pendleton's online. Welcome, Carl. Do you have any comments?
Only when required, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Oh, okay. We didn't hear anything, Carl, but give me a thumbs up if you're good for us to continue. You're okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, Neely.
There too, just so you know.
Oh, okay. It appears, I'm looking at my online list, and Larry Schoen's also participating. Welcome, Larry. Okay, Neely.
Just about there. Okay, here we go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Today, I'll just be giving you a brief update and a chance for you to ask questions. Tomorrow, you'll be asked to consider a resolution to authorize CEF funding. And I have prepared a draft resolution, and it is attached to this memo. I won't go into as much detail as Shelley just did, but I would reiterate that, the management plan was established, approved on May 4th, 2022. That plan contained certain actions. One of those actions was the establishment of a conservation infrastructure efficiency fund. That conservation infrastructure and efficiency fund was developed to be used for infrastructure improvements and other permanent measures that improve the efficiency of delivering senior water rights, protect groundwater levels, increase surface water flows, and for purchasing storage water. As you may recall, on April 2022, the board passed Resolution 14/2022, authorizing a commitment of funds not to exceed $200,000 annually from the Secondary Aquifer Planning Management and Implementation Fund for 3 years, 2023, 2024, and 2025. And that was to match groundwater users' contributions to the CEF. And I would note that as you set your budget for the secondary fund each year, you did budget up $200,000 in each of those years. As has been discussed, the term of the managed plan was 3 years, and it's set to expire here on December 31st. The committee has met a number of times and has submitted a letter to the director with recommendations for that 3-year extension. One of those recommendations is to have the board renew their commitment to provide CEF funding for the plan extension. I have prepared a resolution to provide a commitment of funds not to exceed $200,000 annually from the secondary fund for the next 3 years. That would be fiscal year 2026, 2027, and 2028, where you would set the budget this coming May or past that budget. And it would be on a dollar for dollar match for those funds the groundwater users contribute to the CEF. And just to recall, looking back over the past 3 years, in that first year, it was a 2-to-1 match previously, and the board was able to provide $191,000. In that second year, it was on a 1-to-1 match. The board provided approximately $97,000. And then in that year, third year, I think it's roughly 95,000 that the board has provided over the course of these 3 years. So again, I have prepared a resolution for you to consider, and you'll be asked to take action on that tomorrow. And we do have 2 members from the CEIF committee here today that are attending virtually via Zoom. One is the CEIF chairman, Larry Schoen, and we've also got the CEIF treasurer, Carl Pendleton. And with that, I would stand for any questions from the board, and we have the members of the CEIF that are available for questions as well.
Okay, board members, any questions for Neely? Brian?
Not really a question, Mr. Chairman, but just kind of a reminder. So we put a lot of money in the ESPA into recharge conversions and all those things that we really can't do much in the Big Wood. So that's one reason if we look back 3 years, why did we decide to finance the CEIF committee? Because we can't just, we have a recharge right on the Big Wood, but it's really hard to recharge in that particular aquifer. So I just think it's important that the CEIF committee studies very hard on every application, and so they try to spend the board's money very wisely, I'd say. So that's it.
Okay, board, any other questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Al?
Neely, though, I haven't looked at your resolution, but last time we had some limitations on CEIF using water board money for purchase of storage rights. Is that also included in this resolution?
That is, Mr. Chairman, Board Member Barker, starting on line 65 here, and it may be hard to read, I'll zoom in. Now therefore be it resolved that after this 3-year period, amount at least equal to the board's contribution to the CEIF shall be committed for conservation infrastructure and efficiency projects. So in the past, what they have done is use that water, some of that funding to buy storage. But then at the end of the 3-year period, they had to have a commitment of those CEIF funds toward infrastructure. So this would require that as well. But we do have the treasurer and the committee chair that would speak to some of those questions as well, if you'd like to ask.
But with the additional funding that's proposed in the request to change the advisor or the plan for the next 3 years, wouldn't there be enough money to buy water without the water board money being used to purchase water?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Barker, Board Member Barker, that is correct. That is one of those lessons learned that they've kind of updated some of the changes they've made to the CEIF accounts. They will be setting in a portion of that account for storage water.
So, Mr. Chairman, so do we even need to, should we just say flat out that this is not going to be used to buy storage water this time around if they've got the funding to do it? And maybe that's a question for the treasurer.
I think that's a great question, Mr. Barker. And we've got the treasurer here, Carl Pendleton. Maybe you want to take a shot at answering that question?
Yeah, Mr. Pendleton.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
We can hear you great now. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Yes, as part of our agreement, our new agreement, because Galena Groundwater District had difficulty in fallowing land, why we recognize that difficulty, and so their $25 per actual acre foot of use is dedicated to the purchase of Snake River water or storage water to be brought across. It's going to take us a couple of years to create a fund large enough, given the potential increase in the cost of Snake River waters over the coming years and the demand by many of these agreements. So a portion of our CEIF dollars will have to be dedicated as a backup to that fund for the first couple of years. Just to give you some background, the last 3 years of operation, the cost of water, we purchased the amount of water that we thought would be required to satisfy the agreement. Not nearly a very small portion of that water was really actually applied, and it was then resaled to the groundwater pumpers on the ESPA. And so our expenditures on water from the past agreement were something under $25,000 of the total that was received for all uses. So I do not believe that we would be using contributions from the water board to purchase water, given the increases in the amount of contributions from the cities and the other entities.
Okay, Mr. Barker, does that satisfy you? Okay. All right, board members, any other questions for Neely? Dean?
I just want to make a kind of a comment to what Carl said on the water. I think 1 year, they never used the full amount. I think they used about, and I could be wrong, maybe a third of the water, Pat, about the first year, but I think the other years, the water's been resold.
If that's the case, yes.
So I think, you know, probably at this point, the state money hasn't been involved in the purchase of the water. And they're working with some other groups on ways to, more efficient ways to find the water than what they've done, so.
Mr. Chairman, we could add a whereas in this then to, as at the suggestion of Mr. Barker, to prohibit the use of the board money for purchase of storage water, if that's desired.
Okay, board members, what direction do you want to give Neely on that? Al, do you have an opinion?
And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to clarify, this is Larry Schoen.
Yeah.
Mr.
Go
Chairman.
ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Larry Schoen. So just to clarify the background, in the very first year, storage water was quite expensive. We were very explicitly clear that Water Resource Board money is not to be used for storage water in the first 3-year period of the plan. But in the first year, facing drought conditions, we had to, if you will, borrow from that pool of funds temporarily. And then, as Carl just detailed, ultimately, when all the money was collected and, and then we remarketed the unused portions, our accounting clearly demonstrated that no Water Resource Board money was used for storage water. The SEEF committee intends to create a separate account with its fiscal agent. The Water Resource Board money would be deposited in a separate account to make it even clearer the segregation and use of funds. So I just wanted to say that so that the board is reassured that we are very aware of this issue and the board's concerns around the use of its funds for state funds for storage water acquisition.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Schoen. As I recall, that was all done in the light of day. The board approved working with the SEEF committee to allow that to be averaged over the 3-year period. So
and we actually took care of it in the first year, and so it wasn't an issue after that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. I think the resolution's probably okay as is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Anything else for Neely? Okay. All right. Thank you, Neely. Thanks to those on the SEEF committee, and it's nice to see a group that's continuing to work together in, I hope, harmony. Okay. What's everybody's temperature? Are we okay to continue, or do we need a break? Okay.
I'm okay for a few more minutes.
How long is the Mountain Home model update?
Oh, it'll be 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes.
Okay, I got the green light to continue if we could, please, then.
Okay. Amy Steinke, she's received a promotion since maybe the last time you've seen her. She's in charge of the groundwater group within the hydrology section at the department here, and she'll be giving this update on the Mountain Home Plateau Aquifer model.
Okay, welcome, Amy. We're going through our little circus here, getting your presentation up online. It looks like we're there. Thank you, Jennifer.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. As Brian said, my name is Amy Steinke. I am the groundwater group supervisor in the hydrology section. A recent change of mine. Prior to that, I was a project manager in the hydrology section where I oversaw the Mountain Home hydrologic investigation. Today, I'm here to give you an update on that project, as well as to describe a proposal moving forward into modeling the plateau in conjunction with the Treasure Valley as the Western Snake Plain. There will be a resolution presented tomorrow, and I hope we can secure a funding commitment from the board to fund this next phase. So to begin with, I wanted to go over a timeline of events related to mall development on the Mountain Home Plateau and the Treasure Valley area. So in 2008, the Idaho legislature authorized the board to begin comprehensive aquifer management planning, or CAMP, in the Treasure Valley. As part of that effort, groundwater studies were planned in East Ada and North Ada County to collect data in areas of proposed development. In 2013, as a result of that effort, comprehensive hydrologic investigation focused on the Mayfield Springs area in East Ada County was completed, and a final report was released. In 2016, the board and the department entered into a 5-year agreement with the USGS to develop a new groundwater flow model for the Treasure Valley. And although the Treasure Valley camp was never adopted, that proposed boundary was used as the basis for this new groundwater flow model boundary. So that included the East Ada and North Ada study areas. In 2021, Elmore County came to the board and petitioned the board to incorporate the Mountain Home Plateau into the Treasure Valley model. In response to that petition, the board passed a resolution for $700,000 to authorize a 3.5-year hydrologic study to collect the data necessary to populate a future groundwater model. So we entered into agreements to complete that work with the USGS, and later that year in 2022, the final Treasure Valley model calibration was completed. In 2023, the Treasure Valley model files were made available to the public and a final report was released. And IDWR began having discussions with the USGS on next steps to develop a groundwater model for the Mountain Home area. And then this past year, in the secondary aquifer fund budget, the board allocated $250,000 for year 1 of 4 for groundwater model development in the Mountain Home area. And then we've been in consultation with the USGS on drafting that scope of work to complete that work. And we did receive a draft scope of work last month to complete that. So to orient everyone to the area that we'll be kind of talking about today, here I show the Mountain Home Plateau. So it's located east of the Treasure Valley and west of the Eastern Snake Plain Aquifer. You can see those model boundaries for those two models on that inset map. It's bounded to the north by the Danskin Mountains and to the south by the Snake River. It contains the Mountain Home Air Force Base, the city of Mountain Home, as well as a decent amount of irrigated agriculture. There are no major rivers that cross-cut the plateau, so the majority of agriculture relies on groundwater for irrigation. Due to declining water supplies in 1981, the department designated the Cinder Cone Butte critical groundwater area. That's the area outlined in red. And then in 1982, they designated the Mountain Home groundwater management area, and that's the larger area in black. IDWR maintains a network of approximately 35 wells across this entire region. Some of these wells have data going back over 40 years, so we're able to look at long-term trends in this area. So some of the long-term trends that we do see are some substantial declines. So this is looking at groundwater level changes from fall 1981 to fall 2021 over a 40-year period. A lot of these, we only have data kind of from 10 or 11 monitoring wells that go back that far, but we're able to see that in that southern portion of the Cinder Cone Butte, we see the highest level of declines up to almost 160 feet. What do hydrographs look like? So here's a well in that southern portion of the Cinder Cone Butte declining at a rate of about 3.5 feet per year. If we move a little bit further north, we can see a well that's declining at a rate of about 1.5 feet per year. And if we go north of the interstate, we generally see stable or increasing water levels. So this hydrograph shows a slight increase over time. So to go over the study, this table right here outlines the major components of the study, as well as a time frame of the work. So the work began in early 2022 and is slated to wrap up before the end of 2025. There are 5 kind of major components here, and I'll kind of go through those in the next few slides. The board overall will is projected to spend approximately $650,000 on this project, and the USGS has been able to contribute approximately $150,000 in cooperative matching funds. So to jump into, and I guess, you know, you can see where we're at right here near the end of 2024. So we have a few things that are nearing completion. So the first major component is a hydrogeologic framework. And so this is a conceptual framework that describes hydrogeologic units and groundwater currents and movement. This is being worked on by the USGS, Lauren Zinzer and Scott Ducar. The components of this included a very thorough literature review of all previous work that's been done on the plateau. And then they digitized and interpreted over 500 drillers logs and input that data into a program called Rockworks. They're then able to take that and develop a 3D lithologic model of the subsurface and slice that up different ways to better understand the system. That also ends up being used as the framework for an eventual groundwater flow model. Their report is currently in editorial review, and it's expected to be released before the end of the calendar year. This is just a mock-up on the right. That's actually the big lost basin that's showing on the cover of that. The next major component was conducting mass measurement events of groundwater levels. So this was done in 2023, pre-irrigation season and post-irrigation season. That allows us to see a high resolution snapshot in time of water levels and water conditions on the plateau. In this effort, 180 wells were measured, and that data was used to better delineate the extent of the perched aquifer that exists near the city of Mountain Home. We were also able to, the USGS was able to look at change in water levels from spring to fall and estimate storage change across the plateau. And then the results and maps of the synoptic will be published in the hydrogeologic framework report, which will be due out again in the next couple of months. However, I do have one draft map I can share with you today from the synoptic. So this is water level contours from the spring and fall. The blue lines are contours developed from the spring measurements, and the orange lines are from the fall measurements. These are 50-foot contours. So we're not able to see huge amounts of change with 50-feet contours between the spring and fall. We can see generally that water is flowing to the southwest and ultimately discharging into the Snake River. The inset map on the upper right shows the perched aquifer, and we can see flow across the perched aquifer is a little bit more in a westerly direction. The next major component is developing a groundwater budget. So this is being developed by the USGS for an average year, which was chosen to be 2023. As part of this effort, they estimate inflows, outflows, and overall change in storage of the aquifer system. A final comprehensive report will be published, and that will be published near the end of next calendar year. IDWR GIS staff developed irrigated lands coverage for this effort. So that's shown in this map on the lower left. All the green areas are lands that were irrigated in 2023. We have requested that the budget be calculated for a few different subset areas. So will be calculated specifically for the critical groundwater area, the groundwater management area, and the remainder of the study area. This allows us to compare the results from this study to previous work that's been done before. The next component is well drilling. So IDWR contracted the drilling of 5 new monitoring wells to expand and enhance our current monitoring network. So those are shown in the larger blue dots on this map. We had 4 deep wells and 1 shallow well. All wells are fully cased with steel and screened at the bottom, so we know we have a good well that will last for a long time. We had IDWR hydrogeologists on site to oversee drilling activities and log the drilling cuttings, so we have good lithologic logs of each of these wells. And then borehole geophysics was performed in these wells actually just last week by the USGS, and so we'll have even more comprehensive data of these monitoring wells. Here are a few pictures from the drilling campaign. Of course, we encountered beautiful weather as always, no windy or snowy conditions. The image on the top left is from doing borehole geophysics last week. The image on the lower left is, it's kind of hard to see the colors, but there was a really bright red cinder layer that we hit there. That was pretty cool to see. And the lower right is an example of one of our finished well caps. One of our contractors made us some really nice engraved well caps that look quite nice. So with all this data nearing completion, data collection nearing completion and the hydrologic study wrapping up, we began having frequent discussions with the USGS on how to move into the next phase of this project and to model the system. There were 2 general approaches that were discussed. One was to develop a discrete mountain home specific groundwater flow model. And the second was to model the mountain home plateau in conjunction with the Treasure Valley as the Western Snake Plain. Based on the title of this slide, we thought it was the best route forward to move forward with doing the latter approach. And so I'll discuss that proposal to you today. So our proposed solution is to expand the Treasure Valley model to incorporate the area all the way going towards King Hill into one model. The proposal is to do this with capability that's available in ModFlow 6, where you can have refinement areas. And so this image here on the left kind of showcases illustrates what this might look like at the end of the project. Please note this is for kind of illustrative purposes only, and these specific areas of refinement are subject to change. So with this technology, we are able to have a coarser grid in areas where there's limited data or little development that's occurred, and we can have these inset areas of refinement with a finer grid size. This is would ultimately be all put together and solved as one single model. So there would only be one set of data processing tasks, only one model for IDWR staff to maintain at the end of the project. This is pretty important as we have more and more models being developed across the state and more burden on staff to maintain those. So just having everything in one model with one set of processing tasks would be beneficial for staff. With this approach, we also prevent issues related to overlapping models and difficult boundary conditions. And so you can see the extent of the current Treasure Valley flow model goes out past Mayfield. And if we were to develop a separate mountain home model, we would either have overlapping conditions, overlapping model boundaries in that area, or it would be really difficult to predict any changes happening on that boundary. With this approach, we would also have very limited changes to the current Treasure Valley model. And so that would almost essentially be able to be inserted into this model with limited changes made to it. So we are not redoing all the effort that we put into the Treasure Valley model. However, at the end of this project, the Treasure Valley model would be superseded by the new Western Snake Plain model. We do have abundant data sources to use as a foundation for developing these refinement areas. Most of these that were funded by the board over time. So we have the Treasure Valley model and hydrogeologic framework for that refinement area. In the Mayfield area, we have comprehensive investigations that were completed approximately a decade ago. And then we have the Mountain Home project that is wrapping up and nearing completion. Outside of some of these larger studies that have been done, we also have other data sources we can pull on, such as IDWR monitoring well data, stream flow gauge data, water diversion data, etc. So the proposed workflow is shown here. The project is expected to last over 4 calendar years, beginning in 2025 and wrapping up at the end of 2028. There are a few different phases here, and I'll just walk through those. So there's an initialization phase that would take place over the majority of next year. In this phase, we would make limited adjustments to the current Treasure Valley flow model. We would choose a historic model period. There'd be some literature and data review and filling known data gaps that exist. The next phase is really where the sausage is made, where the bulk of the modeling effort is. This would take place over 3 years, and this is reusing and editing scripts that were previously written for other flow models, preparing data, connecting model areas, defining boundaries and parameters, performing uncertainty analyses, and assessing those results. Some final tasks are that the USGS would be running 2 different scenarios in this project. Those scenarios would be chosen by the department with consultation from the Modeling Technical Advisory Committee. They would publish model documentation, the report, and all associated files in a data release. And then they would also teach a 1-day class for anyone that's interested in running this model. Some ongoing tasks throughout the project is that IDWR would host Modeling Technical Advisory Committee meetings, or MTAC meetings, and USGS would be presenting at these meetings. We also plan to have frequent meetings with between USGS and IDWR just to ensure a smooth transition of handing off the model at the end of the project. So the budget, just as a refresher, hydrologic investigation, the first part of this presentation I talked about, the board authorized $700,000 for that effort, and the total projected spending will be about $650,000. The budget to develop the Western Snake Plain model is $1.15 million, with $850,000 of that coming from the board and $300,000 coming from the USGS and cooperative matching funds. And as you'll recall, the board did allocate $250,000 this past year to begin model development on the plateau. So it's staff recommendation that the board authorize that $250,000 for this fiscal year, and then commit to expending the remaining $600,000 over the next 3 fiscal years to fund the construction and development of the Western Snake Plain model. A resolution will be presented tomorrow for your consideration, and I hope we can secure that funding commitment from the board. And with that, I will stand for any questions. I do have a caveat that I was supposed to have a modeling expert with me here today, and they were unable to make it. So if you have any really technical questions, I might have to come back to you tomorrow. Thank you.
I don't think we're that technical. You could probably bluff your way through it. Board members, do you have any questions? Brian.
Mr. Chairman, Amy, I was intrigued by that area north of Mountain Home that's gaining in aquifer level. Is that conservation or recharge or no idea?
No idea. There's not, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Olmstead. I'm not entirely certain. It's been pretty small gains over time. And it's more, I would more say that area is stabilized is probably what I would say with looking at the long-term record. There is a very limited agriculture up in that area.
And the other question, so you mentioned that the groundwater flow generally is to the Snake River. Is there a point where that regional aquifer does return to the Boise at all, or is it only the perched aquifer that goes to the Boise and the underlying aquifer always goes to the Snake?
Go back to. So you're asking about right here. So is my understanding that essentially all the groundwater that's flowing across that plateau is primarily going to discharge to the Snake. It does not go over. There's a bit of a topographic divide and a general groundwater divide kind of between around this Mayfield area. And so we're not really seeing water going across that and going towards the Boise River. Yeah. And then in the perched aquifer system, so that's around the city of Mountain Home, that generally ultimately drains down into the regional aquifer system.
I was thinking a little more into the Treasure Valley, though, the underlying aquifer under Caldwell, Nampa, all that does the most of that aquifer go to the Snake, and only the because we're concerned about the drains that go back to the Boise, but those are pretty shallow. Does the underlying almost all go to the Snake, or is there a divide there?
I do believe there is a divide there. I am not an expert on Treasure Valley hydrogeology, so I would need to have someone else answer that question.
Mr. Chairman, I just had one general question. You mentioned that there would need to be some maintenance of the model and that one of the reasons for combining the two is so that you could put fewer resources onto maintenance of the model. So what's rather than two different models. So what's the level of effort that you need out of your staff to keep a model up to date?
Yeah, so that really comes into recalibrating models, and there's a lot of effort just involved with understanding how all the scripts and data files feed into it. And so if everything is in one format and uniform across the study area, then it's just one less tool that someone needs to learn.
But it seems like, sorry, Mr. Chairman, it seems like there's a lot of ongoing effort because you're going to take information. You don't want to just have that model static and say, well, as of 2024, this is how it was. We want to keep it up to date so that when we have new information about new withdrawals or whatever, that we can make informed decisions in the future. So somebody's going to have to be assigned to that effort. Sounds like it's not an insignificant effort to have somebody do that.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Barker, you are correct. It is a big level of effort for staff. And we have one staff member currently working on recalibrating the Wood River Valley model. And that's probably taking approximately year and a half of his time. We do try to recalibrate these models approximately every 5 years is more or less the time frame that we generally look at. It's possible that if there are more and more models being developed at some point in time, there might be a request for additional modeling staff to help with that effort.
Yeah, so where I was going with all these preliminary questions is we put money up to develop these models, and then we impose a greater burden on the director and his staff to make sure all this money that we spent is actually something that can be put to use. Is that a fair assumption?
Yes.
Well, I'm glad you're willing to take on these efforts, Mr. Director. Appreciate it.
Okay, any other questions? Probably something as a board we need to recognize is we create these things that have ongoing needs, that those needs are met. Okay, all right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your efforts. Okay, now, Brian, you want 10 minutes? Okay. We'll take about a 10-minute break. Okay.
Now, given there's not that much, that does happen.
Okay, we're gonna reconvene the work session. Looks like next on the agenda, Mr. Patton, is the Blackfoot to Minidoka reach gain measurements.
Yes, Ethan Geiser of the hydrology section will give that report. Just as a brief intro, I do want to just kind of put this in a little bit of context. In the new proposed ESPA mitigation plan between the groundwater districts and the surface water coalition canals, there are several actions that are keyed off of these Blackfoot to Minidoka reach gains as to whether they go up or go down. Additional actions or lesser actions might be taken under that proposed mitigation plan. So I just thought it would be important for the board to understand what that measurement is and how the department calculates that measurement and reports that measurement, so that the board and, you know, the parties to that mitigation plan understand how this measurement is arrived at. We will be getting a more in-depth briefing on the mitigation plan tomorrow.
Okay, welcome, Ethan.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Thanks for having me this morning. So yeah, I'm going to talk today about the Snake River near Blackfoot to Snake River near Minidoka reach gain that Brian just touched on. And so I gave a version of this presentation back at the Aquifer Stabilization Committee meeting in, I believe, August. So I'll touch on some of those same pieces. So many are familiar with the ESPA model boundary there in black. We have a couple points here that we usually focus on in the Aquifer Stabilization Committee meeting. One is the Thousand Springs area, but today I'm going to focus on the near Blackfoot to Minidoka area here in this box. So we'll zoom in there. And so we'll get into a little bit on how we calculate the reach gain. So the reach gain is basically a gain or loss of water between the beginning and end of a reach. So in this case, it's the Blackfoot to Minidoka gauges that the USGS operates. So we take the outflow minus the inflow. So Minidoka minus near Blackfoot. We also take into account reservoir changing content as well as reservoir evaporation in both Lake Walcott and American Falls. We add back in diversions and we take out return flows. So the main return flows are Peoples Canal up here, the Fort Hall canals, and then Aberdeen and Springfield. We have a pretty comprehensive monitoring network where we actually monitor some of those return flows. And so this is what I refer to as the aquifer reach gain. We also take out tributary flows for this calculation as well. So we're basically just trying to isolate what's coming from the ESPA for this calculation. And so I showed this graph in August. We actually have where I showed 2023 increased a little bit from 2022 there, the last bullet. And now since then, I've actually had some provisional data through the water year 2024. And so that's actually increased a little bit more since 2023. So that's a good sign. Some of that big data may change, but just some context for you for this year. So that's the aquifer reach gain. I think there may be some confusion or just uncertainty on how that correlates to the water rate accounting reach gain that Water District 1 runs. So I'm going to walk through some of the differences that we've analyzed here at the department. So that aquifer reach gain we use for two reasons. One, to present to you guys for aquifer management, and the other is to calibrate the ESPA groundwater model. And so I give that data to Jennifer Succo, and she runs her magic on calibrating that model to get it more accurate. We do that on a monthly time step for the ESPA calibration, and then I add that all up into an annual time step to present to you guys. And that's a little bit different from water rate accounting. We're trying to calculate natural flow available within each reach, so that we can allocate that natural flow to people in priority based on prior appropriation doctrine. And that's run on a daily time step at Water District 1. And these calculations are relatively similar, but there are some nuances here. So I'll have those components on each side. So aquifer reach gain on the left, water rate accounting on the right. And you'll see that a lot of them match all the way through. So the Minidoka and Blackfoot gauges are used. We take out the Portneuf for both of these. They're added back in diversions, taking into account change in storage. Where it starts to differ is American Falls evaporation. And I'll get into this a little bit more, but for our aquifer reach gain, we use the range of
of storage, a range of surface area. So it goes from 0 to 60,000 acres. In Water-Ready County, they use 0 to 8,000 acres, and I'll touch on that in the next slide. And then the usual ones, tributary flow and return flow, are taken out of the aquifer reach gain, but they're allowed to be included in Water-Ready County because that's water that's available for natural flow and available for diversions. Back to the evaporation piece. So just on American Falls, this is an excerpt from the Snake River Water Right Accounting Manual. The main takeaways from here are these highlighted portions. So in the calculation for Water Right Accounting, we only do the up to 8,000 acres, and that's because in 1931, from a Water Masters report, they found out that around 50,000 surface acres were already, that American Falls inundated, were comprised of swamp, springs, and riparian areas. So for water rate accounting, we use the evaporation calculation for two reasons. One, for the reach gain, and one, to charge storage contracts in American Falls for evaporative losses. And so they didn't want to charge those evaporative losses for areas that were already evaporating before that area was inundated with American Falls. So that's the reason for that. And that's the reason there's a little bit of discrepancy between the two. Another thing to take into account, so when you're looking at the water rate accounting report from Water District 1, this is a version of that. You got reaches on the top there. You got where it tracks natural flow remaining and natural flow for each reach. Don't focus too much on that excerpt, but just if you're used to looking at the water rate accounting report, you may notice that that's a little bit different than what we're showing on the near Blackfoot to Minidoka reach. And that is because it's accumulating all the natural flow down to the Milner Pool, where a lot of those big diversions are diverting out of. And so this includes all natural flow. So that's the Portneuf River. We also have I mentioned that return flow network that we monitor. We also monitor Burley and Minidoka area returns here. And then, like the Portneuf River is included back in there because it's its own reach. And so any flow coming out of the Portneuf is available downstream to users. So that's another difference between the two if you're comparing what's on the water rate accounting report and what I show to the board at the Aquifer Stabilization Committee meeting. Back to the aquifer reach gain calculation, I think there's been some discussions in the department as well as outside the department of trying to make improvements to that. So I've been running that calculation for a few years now, and I've noticed some areas that could be improved. I've heard some rumblings of other areas that could be improved. So I'll just walk through some of these components. There's always the gauge error that we always have to take into account. USGS does a really good job of trying to update that data as best they can. I don't know how much room for improvement there is there. But the reservoir changing content, that's been brought up a couple times. I think on the annual time step that we're looking at, I'm not sure how much improvement can be made. I think more on a monthly or daily time step, there's some room for improvement, but this is one example. So this is American Falls. If you go, so we take our October value at American Falls and in 2016 and our October value in 2017, there's around a 700,000 acre foot difference there. And that's a pretty big difference. And that's going to come out in the calculation, no matter how accurate it is. If you get a couple more stations on American Falls, you might be a value that's within a certain range here, but it's not going to change considerably too much over that annual time step. That's a big component of the reach gain calculation. So something we could definitely look into if there's other suggestions there. I think that's a good idea to explore, but kind of on the first cut, it looks like maybe on the annual time step, not quite where we could get an improvement. Reservoir evaporation, there's always room to improve here. I know Water District 1 uses a certain calculation that we could just apply to ours on that 60,000 acres, that 60,000 acre range. We have Phil Blankenau in the department, who's a ET specialist we could chat with. So definitely some areas there. Tributary flow, I've noticed one tributary that we don't monitor currently, Bannock Creek, that used to be monitored. I don't know if that's an avenue to explore, but potentially could help the accuracy of that calculation. And then return flows. So this one is kind of a remnant of the old Snake River planning model that was in Fortran. We take a proportion of the actual diversions for these canals. So Peoples, Fort Hall North, and Fort Hall, Maine. So we take a proportion of those and calculate out a return flow each year. We're not actually measuring the return flows like we do in Aberdeen, Springfield area. Except over the past 10 years or so, we've had an MOU with the Shoshone-Bannock tribe to measure some of those return flows. There's some language in that MOU we may have to work around and consult with them about. But one area of improvement would be that maybe the Fort Hall returns, we could start to incorporate those actual measurements into the calculation rather than kind of a proxy. So that's all I have on the reach gain. I'll stand for any questions on water accounting or the aquifer reach gain or anything in that context.
Okay, any questions for Ethan? Dean?
Ethan,
There he is.
so that Fort Hall returns, how big of a number is that?
Yeah, so some of these ones like reservoir evaporation, tributary flow, return flow, those are pretty small proportions of the calculation, but they're low hanging fruit. I want to say it's probably less than 10% of that number. That number that you see on an annual time step.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I appreciate you coming and presenting. I think there's going to be a lot of attention paid to how we make this calculation.
Yep.
It's one of the components of the mitigation plan that triggers additional mitigation activities. So whatever we can do to further refine this and make it more accurate, I think we would all be in support of.
Okay, awesome.
Okay, Brian.
Chairman, just one suggestion, I've suggested this for years, that we do the near Blackfoot to Minidoka as the, what that reach gain is, and to me, it really a couple miles below the at Blackfoot gauge is where the river becomes generally a gaining reach. And if the actions we take in all of what we're going to do, this new agreement, some of that improvement might come in that reach, and I don't see how we're going to see it unless how we're going to, it's not going to show up in this chart because you might have more water at the near Blackfoot, and so you don't get as much of a gain in this chart. So
okay. Yeah, that's a good suggestion. So you're suggesting use the at Blackfoot gauge.
Yeah, I've seen that gauge be off a lot at times, and everybody knows it needs to be replaced, and it will be, but at some point, it just seems to me like this chart should go to at Blackfoot to,
okay.
Just if we're gonna do some improvements and make some gains, we need to see them.
Yeah,
I'm sure Dean would like to.
Okay, I'm going to look in the back of the room for a head nod, but I think Water District 01 is contemplating updating that gauging station, perhaps moving it to where they can get a more accurate reading than where it currently is. Yeah, I think that's in the works. I don't know what the exact timeline is. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have a water supply bank annual report. That would be Mary.
Mary Condon will deliver that report, Mr. Chairman.
Hey, welcome, Mary.
Hello. Thanks. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. I am going to be covering the annual reports for the rental pools and then also the board's bank for 2022. For the rental pools, we'll just cover the Upper Snake, the Boise River, the Payette, Lake Fork Creek, and Lemhi. And then for a summary of the board's bank, we're going to look at the calendar, workloads and priorities, lease and rental application processing, hours billed and staffing, and then volume rented and revenue, and finally financial summary. And if you have any questions during this, please let me know. So this graph right here is just showing the total volume rented through all the regional rental pools for the previous 6 years. And in 2022, it dropped off pretty dramatically as far as total volume rented. And that a lot of that had to do with how much BOR actually rented. The Upper Snake River rental pool had leased and rented 3% of the total storage contents. And they also had an additional 5,800 acre feet of prior year excess use in 2022. Total revenue that was brought in for the Upper Snake for the Water Resource Board was over $300,000, which helps cover improvement projects and funding. And then the Water District itself received just under $200,000 for revenue received in 2022. This one has some additional pools that are listed, and their structure has changed since 2022 through their procedures in 23 and 24. The Boise River rental pool, they leased and rented 7% of the total storage contents in that system, and total revenue received for the Water Resource Board was $18,000, and total revenue received for the Water District was over $100,000. The Payette River rental pool actually did quite a significant volume. It was higher than 01 with 186,000 acre feet, 23% of their storage content in 2022. This helped generate just under $150,000 to the Water Resource Board, and also provided $240,000 to the district. Lake Fork Creek is just a small little rental pool, and they did 2% of their total storage content, just under 400 acre feet. And then the Lemhi River rental pool for natural flow, they did not have any new leases or rentals in 2022, but they do have one indefinite for supplementing the board's minimum stream flow rate. Any questions about rental pools?
Questions? Looks like we're good.
Okay, keep trucking along. So here's the calendar that helps us determine priorities and deadlines for the board's bank. And the top two are going to be processing leases and rentals. This is when we have staff from the Water Allocations Bureau really processing most of the lease and rental applications. And then we also have the rest of the transaction management by priority and when we initiate those efforts. So issuing lessor payments, we try to start that in September to get payments out before the end of the year. And that overlaps significantly with starting lease proposals and reviews. And then November 1, that's when we start processing new rental applications with November 1 priorities. The top graph shows the annual transaction management letters. So this is additional workload on that comes with the program on top of just regular lease and rental processing. And so this is typically performed only by the water supply bank coordinator and the specialist, and not by other staff. For 2022, we issued out over 400 letters regarding conclusion notices for leases and rentals. We also issued 136 letters for warrant payments, and compared to the bottom graph for transactions, those 136 letters contained just under $700,000. And then rental fee reminders for next year, we issued 106 letters. And those 2023 rental fee requests that were issued in 2022 requested just under $950,000. Sorry, I gotta get a drink of water. I'm talking too fast. So what's important about the rental fees reminder letters that we send out at the end of 1 year, reminding folks that they have rental fees due for the next year, is that these are existing multi-year rentals. And you'll notice that those existing multi-year rentals, The total, the $937,000 was significantly more than all of the rentals in 2022. So in 2023, we would also be processing new rentals. So our revenue was a lot higher in 2023 than in 2022. But this is about 2022. So this is our application receiving timeline, and I track this for applications received for rentals by month. And I start with November 1 and prior. Those are our priority processing rentals. And in 2022, we received the highest number, 31 priority rental applications. And then the bottom half of this graph just shows percentages. So we ended up with 40% of our rental applications by the end of December and 70% of our rental applications by the end of March. Part of this, I just want to remind is that additional staff that come from our water allocations group that process leases and rentals, they're generally processing between the months of October of the year prior through the end of March before they start working on other water process applications.
Okay, so Mary, it says 17 of the applications with a 2022 start date were moved to 2023. Were those applications that were received too late to have an analysis and be put in place for the 22 season based on manpower or based on timing of application?
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that question. So in 2022, we struggled quite a bit with staffing priorities and also with the water supply bank rulemaking efforts. So at the beginning of 2022, the water supply bank staff consisted of myself. I was not able to hire a specialist until May. Additionally, the Water Allocations Bureau, through the water rights section, was down 2 agents who were also later hired on in May. And so those 3 new agents, the specialist and the 2 water rights section agents, didn't actually start being able to come on until June. So to answer the question, we were very low staffed for the first half of our processing season for 2022 rental applications. What we're going to see in the next slide, though, is that the effort that the Water Allocations Bureau put towards processing these. In March, I started issuing late notice letters to applicants who were still applying after March 1st. And so you can see in March, we received 7, in April, we received 17. We're continually receiving applications. So those applicants received a letter from me stating, your application was received late in the season. This may not get processed by the end of the requested year. And so would you like to move it? 17 of those did choose to move to a 2023, and they got a 2023 November 1 priority. The top graph shows our rental agreement turnover. So our top bar shows the number of rentals that are in effect by the end of the year. And so you can see there's a growing number based on the number of rentals that are approved, that are received, and that expired. By end of year 2022, we had 234 active rentals. The number of applications received was 124. But that 85 indicates that only about 70% of the applications received were actually approved in 2022. And we also had a high number of existing rentals in 2022 to start off that were multi-year. The bottom graph is an illustration of when rental applications are actually approved in the season for that specific year. So again, these are only applications that are requesting to use water in 2022 or those years that are indicated. So for 2022, it's compared to a 5-year average of years 2014 through 2018. And the lease processing was much lower than that 5-year average for most throughout the entire year. However, rental application processing, while lower in the first half, was much higher than the 5-year average later on in the year. And that has to do again with when staff was available due to staff shortages at the beginning of the year and then made available later in the year. To illustrate this point further, this is the service hours by water supply bank staff as the coordinator and the specialist compared to additional staff hours that are billed to the bank by Water Allocations Bureau staff, TRSs, other folks. So typically 2021 is what is typical. We have a high number of hours billed in the spring, and then it drops off in the summer while they're doing other activities and then picks up in the fall. For 2022, however, it was much lower in the spring, although it was obviously present, and then really ramped up in June and continued out throughout the year with a break in October. And so they really put in a lot of additional effort throughout the entire year to try to help address that backlog. Top graph is another illustration of the board's bank service hours broken by the water supply bank staff compared to total bank hours, and then the actual number of applications processed. So while 2022 had more banked hours or billed hours than any other year, unfortunately, the number of applications processed, total leases and rentals, was much lower than the previous years. So really put forth a big effort to try to get those. Unfortunately, it resulted in more hours less processed. The bottom graph helps to show when the water allocation staff, water rights section staff are doing leases, processing leases and rentals, approving leases and rentals, and profiling those to the physical files and to electronic files, how that time is broken up. So the middle is orange. Those are your water resource agents that are actually the ones that are reviewing these. And in 2022, the amount of time billed was twice what it normally is in previous years. So a lot of agents that are doing this. The top upper gray, that's going to be our supervisors that are actually approving these and working through helping agents by training them and working through those questions. And then the bottom blue is our support staff through profiling. Total leases and rentals processed annually. So just a 10-year, 11-year graph showing the trends. 2015 was really high, 2021 was really high, and then a huge drop off in 2022. Unfortunately, in 2022, we received a lot less lease applications than we normally do. And this really impacted our revenue, which is depicted in the bottom graph. And the number of rental applications approved in 22 was much lower than previous years. And so our overall applications approved was only 351 compared to a 400 to 450 application average. So because we received less lease application filing fees, we were unable to approve as many rentals as were applied for, but we did start with a lot of rentals to begin with in 2022. Our revenues, the income that we received was just under $200,000, but our operating costs hit a whole new high at $287,000 and raised that deficit to $95,000. Volume rented. This helps to show how much volume is rented throughout the board's bank. And in 2022, again, we had pre-existing, plus we had some new ones that were approved. And so we ended up with just shy of 80,000 acre feet that were rented. I also added in Basin 2 to kind of use as a comparison, since it always is the number one basin for the volume rented. And so it made up 21,000 acre feet in 2022 for that total volume rented. And then this is just compared to our actual revenue that the board gets. And so typically whenever our volume rented is high, our revenue is higher. And in 2022, you would expect that our revenue would have been much higher than 2021. But again, we received a lot less lease applications than normal. And so this brought down our overall revenue. The map on the left shows volume rented by basin, and it has the darker for the more amount of volume that's rented. And again, the middle snake has the highest volume, making up 30% of total volume rented for the 5-year average, 2018 to 2022. And then the top right table just breaks down the top 6. I had to add a 6th one because 5 and 6 tied at 8%. But what's important to note here is that number 3 and number 4, those are newcomers to the top 5. The Stanley area really jumped up to 8,000 acre feet and made up 10% of the total. And then Boise River jumped up to 7,000 acre feet and made up 9% of the total for 2022. It didn't impact the 5-year average as seen below, but it really was a huge impact on 2022. And then because this question was asked the last time I presented information for what is surface and what is groundwater, I included that the top basin 2, 21, 63, and 71 were all surface water sources, or mostly. And then our basin 29 and 35 were mostly groundwater, whereas 35 was fully groundwater, 29 was at 85% groundwater, 15% from surface.
Jeremy, could I ask a question, Mary?
Yeah.
Sure.
What's the explanation for the jump in the Stanley? What were they renting water for up there?
Supporting the board's minimum stream flows. So that's a big win.
What's the major rental in the Henry's Fork in Basin 21? Just out of curiosity.
Those are recharge.
Okay. Oh, I know exactly where most of that. Okay.
Yeah, recharge.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, because I love numbers, I put them all on one sheet, but the top third, this is covering leases next to the plus sign. That's total revenue received from lease applications. The blue minus is going to be total cost of managing and processing leases and what that overall difference is. So I like to break it out by process according to how time is allocated, but processing leases and managing them generally cost us $17,000 more than it makes us. The middle third is rentals processed. And so the blue plus is going to be revenue received. That's the administrative fees for rentals approved. And then minus cost of managing those rentals and processing applications. And then you get the total gain loss. And so it makes about $23,000 in 2022. So you almost cancel each other out and you have a zero right there with 5,000 left over in 2022 between those two processes. And then we get into the fun part of the very bottom, communications, coordination, and then research and development. There were a lot of hours that were billed towards helping provide public meetings and the rulemaking efforts, and then training staff and a lot of committee meetings. Y'all saw me quite a bit in 2022. And then this isn't just me, just in case anybody's wondering. That's not just me. There are other staff who are also with those efforts. So Phil Hummer had a big part in helping me with the water supply bank rulemaking as well. So because we have communications coordination, research and development, that's also part of the overall program. We end up with a deficit again in 2022 of, again, $95,000. This is the final slide. This was a projection that was made by my predecessor in 2018 to show what targets could be put together for revenue and then operating costs to help reduce the deficit. So in 2019 through 2022, we actually made more than what the target was. We exceeded it. Oh, 2019, we were just shy, but the other years we actually exceeded. And then as far as operating costs, 2019 through 21, we were below operating costs and we were below that deficit target. So that was really good. But in 2022, again, even though we made more revenue than what our target was, it was much lower than what it has been in years past for leases. And then our operating cost was really, really high in 2022. So our deficit was higher than the target. And that concludes my summary of 2022 board's bank operations, finances.
Okay, board members, questions for Mary? So when is the director going to sick Elon and Vivek on us to become more efficient with our operations? I got a little smile out of it.
Good question, huh?
And I don't know. I assume the department is absorbing that loss. So we probably ought to give that a think, Water Supply Bank Committee, on if we can make some changes that would allow this program to operate a little bit closer to center than it has in the past. Pat?
Lengthening the terms of leases and reducing the paperwork. So.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. McMahon, we used to have indefinite leases. And then we moved to 5-year because some folks were forgetting their water was leased. And that starts causing some issues when we're actually renting that water as well. So while it would reduce paperwork on our end, it might increase paperwork on compliance's end. And from what I've seen, there are probably a couple of processes that we could automate to become more efficient. And one would be rental fee automation. We have multi-year rentals. And so perhaps having a way where people can pay their bill online, and that way it can get receipted online and it can get tracked, and that might help reduce some workload if we're talking about the entire program and not just application processing.
Mr. Chairman.
Dale.
Mary, is all water treated the same as far as rental fees go? Are there different fees that go out for different locations or whatever?
Right, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vanstone. So currently we do not have a variable fee in place. It is across the board the same. However, there are private agreements between lessors and renters that pay a different price.
But they're not using the water bank per se then, huh?
They are still using the bank. They're just doing it at a negotiated price. And it may be higher or lower than what the current rate is. But if it's lower than, we take the 10% of the current rental rate. So in 2022, that was $20 an acre foot. We received $2. If they pay higher than what the rate is, we take 10% of that.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions? Al? Oh, he's okay. Okay, well, I think it's something we ought to look at. Perhaps the applicants could provide more information, or at least a cursory level of what was in the application, and that would maybe take some time off of how long it took staff to evaluate and approve both leases and rentals, those kinds of things. Transfer some of that cost back on those who are utilizing the bank. So,
Chairman, I do want to add a comment. I think one of the things we saw in there is that sometimes it takes a while to get these approved. And so if we're approving rentals at the end of the irrigation season, what are we accomplishing what the bank is set up to do? We need to come up with ways, and unfortunately that like I mentioned on the modeling, it puts a burden on the department staff to try to figure out how to get that done in a quicker fashion. And I think your idea of requiring perhaps some additional information up front would make the evaluations and approvals more easily understood, so that you don't have to go back and ask questions, and maybe we can get things done sooner. So we ought to look at whether or not we should require additional information from the applicants up front.
Well, I think that's one of the things we could do. The other thing we could do is I know there have been occasions, I think some of us have had it mentioned to us that on certain occasions, people needed to get something in place yesterday. And that maybe another thing we could look at, Pat, is some kind of an expedited process that you paid an extraordinary fee to have that accomplished. And maybe that we rely on outside contracts or something to come in and do that work and alleviate department staff from that load to do an expedited review. I mean, I think there's some things we can do to make the bank more efficient and work better for people, and stabilize the required amount of effort from the department.
It's extremely beneficial to both the lessors and the lessees. And it
Yeah.
shouldn't cost us money to do that.
Yeah, I mean, we shouldn't be subsidizing these transactions to occur, and currently we're doing that. That's putting an additional load on the department. So we probably need to work towards some kind of a plan that would solve at least most of that problem, if not all.
So Mr. Chairman, also, sometimes people who get in line in time and get their stuff ready, and have their applications ready and able to be processed, shouldn't be kicked to the end of the line just because somebody has, hey, I'm going to waive some money at the department, I'm going to get mine in front of them. So there's got to be a way to make sure we accommodate people who've done what we asked them to do, and still try to accommodate people who find themselves in an emergency situation.
I agree with that totally. That's why I'm wondering, under these exceptional circumstances, if there's an outside resource that we could draw on so that didn't impede the progress of those who, say, filed the summer before to plan for the following year.
And we have beneficiary use exams that are done outside the department. And maybe there's something similar we could think about in these circumstances for transfer.
Okay, Dean?
Would appreciate the director's thought. Probably now. You've got until tomorrow.
The director doesn't have a mic, so he can't talk right now. Dean, do you have a question?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Mary, do we still have an issue? I know what some of the consultants have done in the past, because I know with the groundwater district, we see this. It's like they apply for all these different water rights leases or whatever else. And they're kind of, throwing up everything up against the wall, and then we'll see what sticks. How many of them get applied for and then take them out to the end, or how many of them get applied for and abandoned?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Stevenson, I think I understand your question, but you're talking about requesting water rights in the groundwater rights in the ESPA that they say they model well, but then that water doesn't end up being available or doesn't work well through the modeling.
Or do sometimes they just partway through, they say, yeah, this isn't gonna work, and the department's done the work, and then they just drop it and don't complete the water bank lease. Is that happening still?
I haven't tracked that number, I think, for 2022, and I don't have that data set in front of me because I was tracking it previously, how many were withdrawn because they went a different route.
Yeah, that's what I'm
talking about. And we saw that a lot more during drought years. So 2019, 2020, 2021, we saw that quite a bit. They opted to do an exchange, or they ended up just doing a permanent transfer, or they just withdrew because they knew that it was going to be out of priority. 2022, I don't think we saw that as much, even though 17 were moved. I don't think we saw the same, like 7 to 10% withdrawn because they just quit halfway through. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, the question I have is how much time does
Right.
staff take working on this transfer that the guys, because of the time wise, to say, nah, we withdraw or whatever? You know, and I guess another issue, you know, why I've got my mic turned on. I agree with what the chairman says about, you know, we need to do some of that, but some of my experience is, you know, have a consultant do something, but it never seems to be the same thing that the department does. There always seems to be, am I wrong on that? There always seems to be a conflict of what the department says works and what the consultant says works. They never seem to. And there's a period of time and they're getting these leases approved when they're fighting that out.
Mhm.
And is there a better way to do that? I don't know.
I would suggest that perhaps you would want to look at an independent third party to do that evaluation.
Right, yeah, maybe.
And not the consultant who is a proponent of
That's
either the
been the
lease
issue,
or
yeah.
the rental occurring. And
Right.
so I don't know how complicated that would be, but I don't know. I just wonder if there isn't a way where we could expedite some of this, even out the load for Mary and her team, and still provide the service that the water supply bank is intended to provide. And maybe that's a lot to ask, but I think we ought to give it a good think. Dale.
Mary, how is the water rental rate determined? Does it stay the same from one year to the next, or? does it vary?
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Van Stone. So earlier this year, the current rental rate was approved to increase in 2025 to $33 an acre foot. And so that was passed here by the board through resolution to increase that. And the previous rental rates were approved in 2013, 2014, based on the NESPERS rates for the rental pools and the BOR rental rate. And so that's what we had adhered to, and it was supposed to go through 2030. But because y'all listened to me and you looked at my numbers, we agreed on $33 an acre foot starting in 2025.
So what's the rate today?
What's today?
Well, yesterday then.
$23 an acre
So
foot.
it's jumping $10.
Correct.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, 50% increase.
Joanne.
Mr. Chair, Mary, is the rental rate, is it paid upfront
Annually.
annually? So like if somebody withdraws, they've already paid you though.
No, ma'am. Mr. Chairman, Ms. Cole-Hansen. So when an application is received to rent, there's no fee with that. It's not until we get through the review and we propose an approved rental for them to sign off on that we include a rental rate, and then they pay that in order to execute the rental. So there's no fee with rentals until it's actually approved.
But you're in the process of collecting fees for the 2025 season right now, and those are due, I believe, by December 1st.
December 31st, yes,
December
sir.
31st.
And those are for existing. So those are multi-year rentals that were already approved in 2024 or earlier that have a multi-year in 2025. And so we request those annual fees ahead of time.
Follow up with that. If a rental was approved in February, payment would have to be received before that rental could proceed.
Correct. So we have some that are approved in the fall for 2024 that are multi-years. We execute it with the rental fee that's due for 2024 and then immediately ask them for 2025 rental fee payment due by December 31st. So they prepay the year for the multi-years.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
If I can follow up with that. Did we once talk about an application fee though?
Yes, ma'am.
And it seems like that might make sense. And to help offset some of the revenue.
I can field that one.
Okay.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, Joanne. So any new fees do have to be approved by the legislature, through rulemaking.
Okay.
The piece that's totally within the board's control is the rental rate itself. You can set that however you choose. In fact, you could introduce tiers or different fees for different areas, different fees for different uses, or different rates, excuse me. But like an application filing fee, does have to be approved by the legislature.
Okay, anything else, board?
Mr. Chairman, can I
yes.
follow up on your earlier comment about finding a solution?
Yeah,
I know that Amy is working diligently and reviewing the program as an outside, IDWR staff member, but outside of the bank itself, looking at the program, talking to people, trying to find efficiencies. And we are working diligently towards figuring out how we can improve processing times with the calendar and with staff priorities. So I just wanted to make you aware that we are working towards that effort.
okay, and that's very much appreciated. I just think whatever support we can give to that effort, we need to look for ways to make this thing get back in the black, or at least pretty neutral. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, administrative rules?
Yep. Eric Swoll with the department will give an update on where everything is at related to administrative rules.
Thank you, Chairman Raybould, members of the board. I appreciate the opportunity to give an update on our rulemaking efforts for the 2024 season. We have been progressing through the zero-based review rulemakings on 2 IDWR rules and 2 board rules. Additionally, we did add 1 rule amendment, which was an IDWR rule. As a reminder, the zero-based review rulemakings for IDWR included 370301, our adjudication rules, 370302, our beneficial use exam rules. And then for our zero-based review rulemakings for the board rules, we had 370303, our injection well rules, and 370309, our well construction standard rules. On August 29th, Mr. Chairman and the board approved a resolution adopting the proposed injection well and well construction rules. Following this adoption, we published 4 zero-based review rulemakings in the October Administrative Bulletin, and that hit the press on October 2nd. As I alluded to a minute ago, we did add 1 rule amendment. This included a proposed rule amendment for 370311, our rules for the conjunctive management of surface and groundwater. This is an IDWR rule. We initiated this rulemaking to align Rule 50, 370311-050 with Section 42233C Idaho Code. This section came into effect on July 1st of this year and clarifies the area having a common groundwater supply for the Eastern Snake Plain Aquifer. This targeted change was purely meant to align statute with rule. Following the advertisement for the 4 ZBR rulemakings and the 1 rule amendment in the October bulletin, we did receive a couple comments, but none necessitated any changes. As a result, on Friday, November 15th, we submitted the notice of pending rules for all the rules, with the exception of the beneficial use exam rules that we submitted on Tuesday, the 19th. All of these pending rule notices should be published in the December bulletin, which is ahead of schedule, and will allow DFM plenty of time to put together the packets for the next session. As far as next steps, we will seek approval from the legislature in the 2025 legislative session, where we hope that all these rules will become final rules on July 1st of next year. I think that sums up where we're at on the rulemaking front. I'm happy to stand for any questions Mr. Chairman or the board may have.
Okay, board members, any questions for Eric? Good work. I know the director misses the opportunity to work on that like he did in the past, but
He doesn't have.
Particularly
Yeah.
the subsea dredge mining.
yeah. Anyway, We appreciate you keeping track of all that, and keeping us on task.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that.
Okay. All right. Do we have a cloud seeding program update?
We do, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, right there.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, very well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I sincerely apologize. I'm not able to be there with you all this morning. I've got a tiny fleet of small children at home and we're going through the flu season. So I do apologize, but I just have a very brief update for you today on the cloud seeding program that I will walk you through. And get my slides to move through here. So really briefly, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to cover our current operations that just began November 1 of this year, the current projects that I'm working on for the cloud seeding program, briefly touch on our program priorities, and an update on where we're at with the program budget. So first, Mr. Chairman, I would like to start by reminding everybody that we now have an updated web page on the board's, we now have an updated cloud seeding web page on the board's website. So this is the first resource for information that we have for folks interested in learning information on our current operations. So on the board's main page for cloud seeding, this does show where our current active and inactive operations are. And for clarification, when we post that we do have active cloud seeding operations going on, that means that we are actively forecasting and watching for winter storms, not necessarily that we have active operations going on at that time. And then this webpage will also report when we have any suspensions, if any suspensions throughout the season. So this webpage, again, is an additional resource where we will house reports on our cloud seeding operations. And this is where folks can go to learn about the research and development and the current happenings of our program, as well as my contact information for you all. So brief reminder, as you all are aware, you all were authorized under section, 424301, which designated you all, the Water Resource Board, as the agency responsible for authorizing cloud seeding projects in Idaho. So currently, in addition to the collaborative program, we have 3 additional projects authorized by the Idaho Water Resource Board. This information and more detailed information on these authorizations can be located at the webpage noted below. Those 3 additional projects are the Idaho Power Company Payette River Basin Project, the High Country Resource Conservation and Development Project in Eastern Idaho, and the state of Utah, which does operate some manual generators in the southern portion of the state. So this is just a brief overview, a map of our 2 different cloud seeding project areas, the collaborative program, which operates in the West Central Mountains, as well as Idaho Power's Payette River Basin project, which operates in the West Central Mountains. So again, the Payette project is operated independently, but as you can see from our map, we do share and coordinate on those operations for efficiency. Over in the eastern portion of the state, we do have the Idaho Collaborative Cloud Seeding Program in the Upper Snake, and that is overlapped by the High Country Resource Conservation and Development Manual Generator Program. Those generators are noted by the green dots that you see in the map on the right. Brief overview of these programs. The Idaho Collaborative Program, as you're aware, is a partnership between the state, the power company, and local stakeholders. This program currently has about 57 remote ground generators, 3 aircraft, a large network of weather instruments, and sophisticated modeling technologies. It operates with a dedicated atmospheric science team from Idaho Power. And again, it is coordinated in partnership with Idaho Power and their Payette River Basin project. Payette River Basin, Idaho Power's independent project. That project has about 8 dedicated ground generators for AGI, or silver iodide. Last year, we also updated their authorization to include 7 ground generators using liquid propane. The Payette River Basin project also shares about 9 generators with the Boise River Basin, as well as an aircraft. And again, it is coordinated in collaboration with the collaborative program. High Country RC&D program in Eastern Idaho has about 25 manual ground generators, and they do receive forecasting support that is coordinated with Idaho Power. That program has historically, since the 90s, been sponsored by local basin stakeholders. And last year, in fiscal year 24, the Water Resource Board did provide some additional funding support due to their growth in program costs. The last program that you all have authorized is the Northern Utah Cloud Seeding Program. That is sponsored by the state of Utah and local basin stakeholders. It is operated by North American Weather Consultants out of Utah. So on the right-hand side, I've included a map of the state of Utah's cloud seeding projects. The green color at the very top represents their Northern Utah program. And you'll notice circled in red are the generators that overlap into our state. However, these are still targeting their Northern Utah projects. And the state of Utah has also notified us that they are planning expansion into the Bear River Basin. Staff are working with Utah staff on a potential proposal from the state of Utah on how the state of Idaho and the state of Wyoming may coordinate for these operations in the future. So we're expecting more on that over the next couple of months. Current season operations, as I mentioned, seasons begin November 1, so we're really only about 3 weeks in, not a whole lot to report. Idaho Power with a brief check-in. They've conducted so far about 3 flights in the Central Mountains, 1 in the Upper Snake so far since the first. The High Country RC&D has also operated their manual generators for about 3 storms to date over the last 3 weeks. And the state of Utah is reporting currently about 375 manual generator hours and 134 remote generator hours, which are new to some of their projects this year. So we heard from the water supply meeting yesterday that some of our conditions are near normal snowpack, and our winter outlook is currently favoring below normal temperatures and above precip for most areas, potentially a little bit drier in the south. But again, we don't really know when that transition from the warmer to the colder season La Nina conditions will happen. So I guess we'll see how that pans out for cloud seeding this year. But again, just a brief reminder, like we like to reiterate, even if we do have a good cloud seeding season, we're still a long ways from recovering our hydrologic systems from persistent drought. And even in a good year, cloud seeding will continue to contribute to bolstering supply, both groundwater, carryover, and in a number of different ways. So current projects that we have going on for the cloud seeding program, the first and foremost priority is the cloud seeding analysis. As you all are aware, you asked us to kind of take a look at who benefits from increased snowpack and ultimately water supply. So I'm not going to go over any details of the analysis, but suffice to say from this image, there's a lot of complexities that go into who benefits from increased snowpack. So we do have some initial results, as you all are aware, that we are beginning to roll out. And we will start rolling out those results to water users through water district annual meetings beginning in the first of the year. So moving forward, Mr. Chairman, I'm seeing if my slides are moving here. With the cloud seeding analysis, in addition to coordinating those presentations with water users and stakeholders, we still have ongoing improvements to each of the 3 models that support the cloud seeding analysis. So the cloud seeding model, the hydrology model that gets us the water volumes, and then the planning model that routes it. So there is ongoing continued work for that, in addition to rolling out some of these presentations. Liquid propane is another project that staff are working on. If you recall, back in September, you all authorized about $170,000 for instrumentation to deploy on the Little Camas Prairie this winter. So in total, we are deploying around 30 different weather instruments, including a large X-band weather radar that the board approved funding for last year, fiscal 24. We are coordinating the liquid propane investigation with the state of Utah, who will also be providing funding support, including for a principal investigator to lead the full investigation. So NCAR will staff that principal investigator position. And again, it will be funded by the state of Utah. And they will contract directly with Utah for that. And then the Water Resource Board will get a copy of all the final findings and reports. So for the liquid propane, in addition to the state of Utah and working with NCAR, we're also working with Cryo Toolbox and BSU to coordinate aerial drone surveys and instrumentation for field support. And then as well, Idaho Power is a part of this project and providing our liquid propane generator that we will use for investigations this winter. The tower for which you're seeing on this image on the right, so it utilizes the same base stand infrastructure that we do for our AGI instruments, or excuse me, our AGI generators. However, when this thing is fully built out this winter, you'll see some large cones at the top and a number of different instruments that will get attached to it. Moving on, Mr. Chairman, we also have our continued existing model development. So as you are aware, we have ongoing work with Idaho Power and NCAR on the cloud seeding model. The cloud seeding model supports operations. We also use it for feasibility and design. And as you're aware, our future improvements, we are targeting it for use in evaluating estimated increases in precipitation. So still a number of years to go, I think, before we get to that, full-scale product for estimating increases in precipitation. But that work is ongoing with Idaho Power and NCAR. We also have some existing modeling agreements for the hydrology model. So this is the model that will help us to estimate water volumes generated from cloud seeding. We are working with IDWR hydrology staff and NCAR, as well as some other different potential contractors to improve our regional calibrations for this hydrologic model, as well as continue the development of this model to the point where it can estimate these water volumes from cloud seeding. So again, those are ongoing contracts that you've already approved funding for that staff are currently working on. And then we currently still have work on the riverware planning model. As you're aware, that one is not only used for cloud seeding, but recharge as well. And so we'll still have a lot of ongoing improvements to that model to improve diversions and recharge, as well as building out the Wood River Basin into the model. On the Lemhi River Basin, NCAR has wrapped up their feasibility and design study. The staff are working to find time to present those results to you all. We anticipate that sometime early in 2025. NCAR has also been contracted by the state of Montana for feasibility and design in the Beaverhead Big Hole Range directly over the border from the Lemhi River Basin, and they are getting ready to roll out those results to Montana's biannual legislature, which will start in January 2025. So in talking to NCAR, their initial findings from both our feasibility and design here in Idaho and on the state of Montana, they have found there to be fairly significant opportunities for collaboration between the two states. And Montana has expressed some interest in potentially collaborating with the state of Idaho. So staff are currently working with Montana to understand their interests. And we will keep you updated as we know more after they get their results rolled out to legislature this January. In the Bear River Basin, as you're aware, we've already completed the feasibility and design study. As I mentioned, the state of Utah is moving forward with expansion efforts in the Bear River Basin, largely to support the Great Salt Lake efforts. So we will be seeing a proposal from them, hopefully in the next couple of months, on how they're going to be expanding and how they may propose to work with the state of Idaho and the state of Utah. So staff are actively engaged in collaborations on that. Lastly, Mr. Chairman, staff are also responsible for program administration. So this does include coordination with the public on reporting, collaboration with our program partners, and supporting agencies and organizations such as the Weather Modification Council and the Weather Modification Association. Both of these organizations, which have been instrumental in supporting board and board staff with information that relates to cloud seeding policy, science, and technology, as well as ongoing research. So this has been a monumental resource for collaboration, both these organizations. Moving on, Mr. Chairman, the cloud seeding program priorities, as I currently understand them over the next year. We've made it one of our top priorities to complete or get executed an MOA, a long-term MOA for the collaborative program. Again, this includes our operations in the Boise, the Wood, and the Upper Snake River Basin that are operated by Idaho Power with support from the board and stakeholders. The second priority for this year, Mr. Chairman, that we've identified is resolving our long-term stakeholder contributions. So what are we going to ask from our water users moving forward into the future? The third priority will be resolving our long-term modeling commitments. So deciding what we are going to need for ongoing monitoring and analyses and which of this work needs to be prioritized to accomplish those goals for long-term monitoring and analyses. The fourth program priority that I have for you, Mr. Chairman, is on the authorization and reporting updates. Something to note is that we don't currently get monthly reports from any of our operators. In September, I had come to you all with some proposed changes to the reporting criteria for authorizations, and staff are actively working with our operators and program sponsors to understand how these changes may affect them. And then staff would propose again to come before you all sometime in early 2025 with formal updates after we have finished working with our sponsors and operators. And so then, Mr. Chairman, the last program priority that we have is that development of a 5-year program plan. So once we can resolve our existing program operations, where does the board hope to go with this program? Last item I have for you, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to wrap up with the current status of the cloud seeding program budget. So asterisks in this middle column, as you're aware, are the items that you all have required staff to come back for further authorization. So briefly in this budget, we have set aside money for operations. We get these numbers from Idaho Power in April when the previous season has not yet wrapped up. So these are very much cursory estimates when Idaho Power gives them to us. Once they wrap up their season, do their final accountings, and do the estimation for the next season, we don't get those numbers until July, until after the budget, until after our fiscal year budget has started. So through that process, we did have some increased costs this year, not very much. As you can see, noted by the green on the bottom right, we still have quite a bit of funding that has not yet been authorized in the secondary fund. So this increase in operational costs that you're seeing, this red, you all will consider a resolution tomorrow to increase these costs slightly to cover those estimated costs. On these other costs that you have noted here that you have not yet authorized, we have some money set aside in capital for repair replacement of existing infrastructure. Idaho Power may come to us in early 2025 with any needs for our existing projects. And that is what that money is set aside for. Under the technology column, we have about $1.1 million set aside for computing and modeling. That is for the high-powered computer that runs our models. As you are aware, that has a lifespan that's reaching its limit. Staff are currently working with Idaho Power still to determine what that final cost and cost share is going to be. So I anticipate that I will come before you sometime this spring to get authorization for some portion of that computing cost. Lastly, on the research and development side, so we have the research and development technology column. I set aside about $1 million for this. This includes that downscaling effort that we had talked about at the last meeting, as well as some other necessary modeling improvements that we will work to resolve over the next couple of months. Investigations column, we've spent about $170,000 so far. That is for the liquid propane investigation. We have about $430,000 left over under that column. I also had set aside about $300,000 for new basins. This was if we had decided to move into the Bear for weather instrumentation that would need to be deployed before we can begin operations. And then as well, you all had set aside some money in the program funding reserve category. This generally covers, unexpected, costs that may come up for some of our existing projects and/or administrative costs. So in total, Mr. Chairman, to date, you've authorized nearly $2.5 million for this program and have just under $3 million still left over for the cloud seeding budget for the remainder of the fiscal 2025 year. So Mr. Chairman, that is all I have for you, and I will stand for any questions.
Okay, board members, questions for Kayla?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Al.
This really isn't a question for Kayla, but it's something for her to worry about.
Oh, no.
I have received a number of queries from water users over here in this side of the state who are curious as to whether or not we could enhance cloud seeding in the Lemhi, the Salmon, and the Clearwater, and perhaps use that enhanced cloud seeding as a means of complying with the Snake River flow augmentation obligations in the future. Obviously, that involves changes to the NESPERS agreement, which are coming up probably sooner than any of us expect. And so I think the question that's been asked of me is, what's the water board doing about looking into that as a possible tool in our survival under the future NESPERS agreement? And there's no real answer to that question yet, but it's a topic that I've been asked to raise with the board.
Okay, so raised, I know people have talked about that. And I suppose that could be something that could be introduced into those negotiations, and depending on how receptive the federal government was to that, then that would probably be the time that we'd want to move forward with determining what it would take to develop that, I suppose.
Well, at least the Lemhi study will be something that we might be able to use as a foundation for further evaluation if that turns out to be something that the water users in the state would like to see done.
And we have the initial evaluation from NCAR, and I think it showed there were significant opportunities on the Clearwater. Mark, do you have a comment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I think regarding the Lemhi, I think aren't we doing some collaborative work with Montana that might spill over onto that divide, the cloud seed some of that Lemhi country? I guess that's probably a question for Kayla.
Kayla, did you hear that?
I did, Mr. Chairman, Board Member Gibbs. So we have, so far, staff have just had some initial conversations with the state of Montana and NCAR about their evaluations. But we are not actively engaged with any discussions yet about, formally moving forward. We've just identified that there is significant opportunity, yes.
Okay, answer your question.
Mr. Chairman, the only other thing I would comment is the only problem with expanding into these additional basins is the cost and the continued resources that we need to expand cloud seeding into these new basins.
That is true. Okay, I think everybody's curiosities have been taken care of. Kayla, thank you. Sorry to hear about your little ones. Hope all is going well on the home front.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Mr. Patton, we're down to non-action items.
Steve did have one item he wanted to show you during the non-action items.
Okay.
We can skip it if you want, Brian.
It's what, 2 minutes?
It's a 2-minute time lapse of the New York Canal construction sequence for the rehab project.
Oh, let's see it. Then we'll already know what we're looking at when we get there. Okay.
Save 2 minutes.
There's no sound, so it's just video.
This is the work that the project did last year, right?
I think actually they shot this in 2020, Al.
We're trying to existing concrete.
You have to dig it down, and they'll probably explain all that to us.
In some places there's concrete, some places there's asphalt, some places there's brick. Sure, says.
Going at this rate, I can't understand why they can't do the whole 6 miles in one season.
Next week.
This was only 2 minutes.
today.
Yeah.
Tarps are arranged both.
It's an anti-Idaho group, got the contract.
Yeah.
Very simple, huh?
It's just money, right?
Okay, thank you, Steve. Board members, does anybody have any non-action items we need to take up during this work session? Okay, there being none, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn to the field trip. Or what? You might
Just-
have my game.
Yeah, before we adjourn, because we are running like an hour and a half later than I thought we would.
Yeah,
And I initially thought we wouldn't need lunch, but our crack assistant decided to overrule my decision and order us some sandwiches.
oh,
So we'll have, we'll take maybe 15 minutes to eat a sandwich and then convene downstairs in the parking garage.
oh,
At,
okay,
say 12:15 or 12:20.
maybe 12:20?
12:20.
Okay,
So is Bob knows.
Yeah, Steve has called Bob. So
okay. All right, with that further instruction,
Adjourn.
is there a second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you, one and all.
I owe you some comments. Yeah, you do. They're coming. Yeah.